The juries are not present. There were some matters that counsel wanted to discuss prior to continuation of cross-examination. The specific matters that counsel indicated that they wanted to have resolved dealt with a box of materials and also cross-examination of the defendant Lyle Menendez in reference to a particular conversation with Dr. Oziel where the use of the word sociopath occurred, or during which the use of the sociopath phrase was used. And let's first deal with this box issue that has been the subject of discussion. To summarize the matter, there has been, by way of testimony and also by way of offer of proof in declarations and exhibits, the following information that the defendant, Lyle Menendez, was arrested in early March of 1990. Shortly thereafter, he contacted Jamie Pisarcik, who was requested by the defendant Lyle Menendez to retrieve or cause to be retrieved a box of documents from his Porsche, which was in a repair shop. Pisarcik then contacted witness Glenn Stevens, instructed Mr. Stevens to go to the repair shop and retrieve the contents of the box and turn it over to Mr. Chaliff, who was then counsel for Lyle Menendez. Mr. Stevens was further instructed, according to the declarations and testimony of Mr. Stevens, Mr. Stevens was further instructed not to look into the box or review its contents. Mr. Stevens testified further that he did not follow that instruction, but did in fact open the box and look inside. And inside the box, he observed personal papers of various sorts, at least one letter written by Mrs. Menendez, and also a letter written by Mr. Menendez addressed to the defendant Lyle Menendez, in which Mr. Menendez expressed his, basically his love for his son. The letter written by Mrs. Menendez, according to Mr. Stevens, was a letter written by Mrs. Menendez to Mr. Menendez. Mr. Stevens further testified that he thereafter turned over the materials to Mr. Chaliff. Prior to the commencement of trial here, the prosecution served a subpoena ducis tecum on the defense to obtain the box and its contents. The matter was deferred since the subpoena had been served on the defense prior to commencement of proceedings in Superior Court. The matter was deferred until filing of the case in the Superior Court and assignment of the case to a trial court. Thereafter, the matter was presented to this court. Briefs were filed by each side. The defense voluntarily produced the box and turned over the box and its contents to the court, with a suggestion that the court could review its contents in relationship to the prosecution's request. At the time the box was turned over, certain representations were made by the defense, and those representations were made by Ms. Abramson to the extent that she was the person who last had custody of the box, or most recently had custody of the box before turning it over to the court. Prior to that, she had received it from Mr. Joel Isaacson and her understanding was that Mr. Isaacson had received it from Mr. Chaloff. And Ms. Abramson further indicated that the contents of the box as produced in court are identical to the contents of the box that she received. And thereafter, the matter was held in abeyance until such time as the prosecution sought to have the matter resolved. And we are at that stage now where the prosecution is again, or at this time is asking that the court resolve the issue of the contents of the box. First of all, as regards my recitation of the underlying facts as they have been presented here, do counsel have any modifications or suggestions for correction?
No, it's up to the court that when the court says we voluntarily produced the material that was in response to a subpoena, and we did voluntarily ask that the court review it in camera for purposes of determining whether it fit within the line of cases that people were relying on.
That's correct. And the court has reviewed the contents of the box.
And there was one other thing, Your Honor. The court is correct in reciting the information concerning Glenn Stevens. It's my recollection that Mr. Stevens did not testify in front of the jury as to the contents of the letters.
No, I didn't say he testified in front of the jury, but he has so testified and or described it in a interview with the prosecution, which was attached as an exhibit. And I've referred to that as well as part of the foundational basis for this hearing. Actually, the counsel for Lyle Menendez sought to go into the actual contents of the box before the Lyle Menendez jury. The record indicates that Ms. Lansing asked Mr. Stevens before the jury to recite what it was that he saw in the box, and the people objected on grounds of hearsay, and ultimately that objection was sustained. So the defense actually tried to get into the contents of the box before the Lyle Menendez jury, and for whatever reason, the prosecution objected. That objection was sustained, so that's where we are. And now the prosecution does want to get into the contents of the box. All right, and the court has reviewed the box and its contents, and I'll make some observations. I think it's appropriate to do so. That number one, the box itself does fit the physical description as provided by Mr. Stevens. He described in his testimony a backgammon game box, and that is what this box is. And within it, there are numerous personal papers and documents. The specific document that was referred to as a letter from from Jose Menendez to Lyle Menendez is not in that box as it was presented to the court. And that was also suggested by Ms. Abramson at the time that box was produced, and this matter was discussed in court, that the inference from her remarks was that that specific letter was not in the box. There are other letters or documents, written documents in the box written by Mrs. Menendez that do deserve discussion in this regard. And to expand upon what has been presented in the briefs, let me say that from the direct and cross-examination of Lyle Menendez, it would seem that he has identified certain items that are in that box as items that he had seen either before or after his mother's death. And my question to the defense is this not an appropriate area for the prosecution to inquire whether he has those documents and whether he could produce them?
May I have a moment, Your Honor?
First of all, as a factual matter, it's our recollection that the testimony by Lyle Menendez is referring to a letter, which is a journal entry that apparently was in the possession of Mrs. Menendez's therapist. And it's also our understanding that prosecution is already in possession of that particular letter. That's as to the factual issue. And as to the legal issue, Your Honor, it's our position that the question here for the court is not one of relevancy, and it is not one of privilege, but it's really one of discoverability. Whether this information can be properly turned over to the prosecution under the case authority that they've cited. And when the court first visited this issue back in March of 1993, on March 29th, at page 545 of the transcript, the court, after carefully looking at the cases that were cited for you on this issue, said that the case law here primarily deals with instrumentalities of the crime or proceeds of the crime, things of that nature, rather than circumstantial evidence or evidence of intent, things that don't directly relate to the commission of the crime itself. So the defense submitted the box and the letters to the court for determination of whether or not the information fit within the category or the dichotomy outlined by the court's decision, which was it fruits or instrumentalities of the crime on the one hand, or on the other, was it circumstantial evidence of intent or things that don't directly relate to the commission of the crime itself. So the court, having reviewed those documents, I think is in a position to fit them into one category or the other. And it's our position that at most, and without revealing the content of the information, at most what could be said about the information is that they constitute circumstantial evidence or evidence of intent. So that would make them relevant. But under the case law cited by the people, the information is still not discoverable given the way in which the prosecution is seeking to obtain this information, which is a direct subpoena to defense lawyers, asking them, in effect, to produce relevant information in their possession. And it's a position of the defense that if the cases cited by the people are expanded to include any and all relevant evidence in the hands of the defense counsel, then that really makes a shambles of the whole Prop 115 discovery scheme, because it, in effect, imposes upon counsel under these cases that the prosecution cites a duty to come forward with whatever fits within the Fairbanks line of cases. And if that rule encompasses any evidence of whatever nature that could be arguably deemed to be relevant either in the prosecution's case in chief or in the rebuttal, then there is no more 115 discovery guidelines. It's simply the situation that the defense must open up its files and produce any and all relevant evidence that could be used either in its case in chief. Whether they intend to produce it or not, they're under a duty, at least according to these cases, to hand that over to the court. And it's our position that that reads those cases way too broadly, and that the court was correct in its reading of the cases back in March. Nothing has changed as to the law up to this point, and the court, even if it found that these documents were relevant, should still continue to conclude that they are nevertheless not discoverable.
Well, let me respond briefly, and then I'll hear if there is a response by the prosecution. The testimony of Lyle Menendez on cross-examination was that he found some journal entries written by the mother relating to problems with alcoholism, and this was something he found prior to the killings and found in the Calabasas home. He also indicated that he found additional documents of things written by the mother and papers of the mothers, along with jewelry and other personal effects after the killings, and actually went to seize or take possession of these writings prior to his aunts going into the Beverly Hills house and going through the mother's personal belongings, and took possession of these items. He indicated also that he probably read the letters, although he doesn't remember precisely.
Skating for over 45 years has taken a toll on my body. I take Qunol turmeric because it helps with healthy joints and inflammation support. Why Qunol? It has superior absorption compared to regular turmeric. Qunol, the brand I trust.
That all came out on cross-examination, and all appropriately so, because there was reference in direct examination to Mr. Menendez having seen such documents. And the prosecution elected to wait until this stage of the proceedings before pursuing the matter. This is not a pretrial hearing anymore. This is a hearing that occurs during the course of cross-examination of the defendant after certain items have been referred to by the defendant, and the defendant has indicated that he preserved these items, that these were not things that were discarded, but that he preserved, and it would be appropriate for the prosecution to at some point ask him to produce those items if he did preserve them, if they were things he read and that that were documents that reflected his mother's state of mind at relevant times during these issues, or during these events that have been described, then they would be relevant evidence and would be a proper area of cross-examination. And the circumstance is that for whatever reason, those documents are now in the possession of the court. I can't blind myself to the fact that they're there and that I've seen them, but they're here. There might be many other documents that are in the possession of the defense. The prosecution isn't seeking those. They've asked for these specific items. The posture of the case prior to trial in March, when the matter was discussed, was one where it was speculation as to what, if any, relevance these documents would have, or whether the prosecution would have any right to them prior to trial. And the court observed that at that time, the subpoena and request for production of the documents would be analogous to the prosecution making a demand on defense counsel prior to trial to produce any and all documents and information and exhibits and items that might have been turned over by the defendant to counsel, so that the prosecution could review those things and decide whether or not there was anything there of evidentiary value. And clearly that would be a violation of the defendant's right to counsel and Fifth Amendment rights. But we're not at that stage now. We're at a stage of cross-examination where these specific items have been referred to by the defendant in his direct and cross-examination. And the people are now seeking for those specific items to be produced. And this, again, is a separate issue from the issue of that other letter that may or may not have been in the box that has been described by Mr. Stevens. And it's a separate issue from how that box came to be where it is now, or came to be in a possession of counsel. Those are not issues that we're discussing. We're just discussing the subject of the production of the letters for the prosecution or those documents for the prosecution to review, and whether or not they will actually be used in evidence would have to obviously be a decision made by counsel after reviewing the documents. Yes.
In response to the court's comments, which is, I said there were no privilege issues involved here, and in saying that, I was referring to the subpoena situation, which I thought we were discussing, but it seems to me the court is talking about another level of compulsion here, which is an order to the defendant, while he's on the stand testifying, to produce evidence, and the production of that evidence, it's argued, would raise self-incrimination problems. If the court is talking about an order now directly to him, requiring him to testify about or hand over documents and to reveal where those documents came from and the source of those, it seems to me would raise privilege issues beyond the subpoena issue.
What privilege?
The self-incrimination privilege.
After he's discussed it voluntarily in direct examination, that the prosecution would have a right to ask questions about it?
Well, it's our position that factually he has not discussed these letters in any way, either on direct or cross-examination. That's, of course, for the court to decide, but it's our position that these letters were not in any way referred to.
Well, I've just recited my recollection of the testimony, and if the defendant's position is that these documents are not those things that he referred to, then perhaps there's some merit in what you say. But if they are, then would not the defendant be in a position of being asked on cross-examination, do you have those letters? Would you produce them? And he would then have to say, no, I destroyed them, or I gave them to my counsel, or something of that nature. Those things would not be subject to a Fifth Amendment claim, would they?
Well, I think if he attempted to exploit the contents of the letters in some way, for instance, by referring on the witness stand, these letters indicated that my father hated me or my mother hated me, that would be a situation where I think there would be a valid waiver. But at best, if the court interprets the record as being that he has somehow referred to the exact letters we're talking about here, the mere reference to the fact that letters were observed or were in the house, I don't think constitutes a waiver any more than an expert who is testifying and says that he interviewed the defendant without going into the content of that interview would give rise to a waiver of whatever the conversation was.
Well, this certainly is not a conversation. This is just a document written by another person that he happened to take possession of, and he is described here as to how he took possession of it. He was afraid his aunt would find it, so he took possession first.
No, it's true, but without reference to the content of the letter, I don't think that he's waived any privilege with respect to self-incrimination.
Well, let me back up and ask you, if there was no privilege issue in regards to the subpoena ducis tecum, how could there be a privilege issue as to what the court has been discussing now?
Because it seemed to me that the court went beyond discussing the subpoena issue, which I thought the issue there was strictly whether that subpoena was properly, the court said it can't ignore the fact that the documents are in your possession, but the fact remains those documents are in your possession and you were allowed to look at them because of an order that was served, a subpoena served on defense counsel. So I think the issue in regards to the subpoena is, was that a lawfully issued order? We did not disobey the court order in good faith. We submitted it to the court for in-camera review, but I don't think that fact should now be turned around against the defense and used to somehow say that, well, since the court's already looked at it, we don't need to worry about the issue of how it was validly produced in court. I think that's the issue in regard to the subpoena. That is, was it properly ordered? Was it a proper order to the defense to produce those documents? And it's our position it was not.
All right, let me just to respond, and then you can continue. There was no order of the court to produce these things. This was a subpoena ducis tecum served by the prosecution on the defense. There was no motion to quash the subpoena. The items were produced in court. The defense voluntarily asked me to look at them. So that's basically what happened. It wasn't any order issued by the court.
Well, there was a motion to quash in the sense that there was no compliance by agreement between counsel, and the papers indicate that both sides agreed that the court would hear arguments and read briefs on the issue. So it isn't a voluntary situation. That was my only point. But the second point I was trying to make was that I thought in the court's comments, the court was indicating that the issue now was, can Lyle Menendez himself be directed, aside from the subpoena, to produce or be asked on the witness stand, well, where are those documents and will you bring them to court, or have the court order him to do that? And it seems to me that that sort of order raises different issues than the validity of this subpoena.
Well, that, as far as I'm concerned, is where we're at. I don't see how the subpoena is the issue at this point. It's the documents themselves and whether they can be produced. What is the people's position on this whole matter?
When I filed the brief in March of this year, I cited the Lee, Meredith, and Fairbank cases. Since then, I've shown the counsel and I provided for the court the case of Clutchette versus Russian. It's a Ninth Circuit Court of Appeal case at 770 Federal 2nd, 1469. It's a 1985 case. Counsel has argued that the Fairbank, Meredith, and Lee line of cases only reaches fruits and instrumentalities of the crime. I believe that Clutchette goes beyond that based on those cases, in particular Lee and Meredith. Fairbank came in 1987. In Clutchette, the evidence to be produced was a receipts from an automobile upholstery shop. And that had to do with what occurred in that case was a murder occurred. Blood was gotten on the upholstery of the car. The car was then taken to an upholstery shop to be reupholstered. And it was the receipts, not the instrumentalities of the crime, not the victim's belongings, not the weapon used, but receipts that indicated that the automobile had been taken to this upholstery shop for reupholstery. That is not instrumentality. The receipt is not what was used as a weapon. And I believe that it goes beyond what counsel claims, that it isn't limited to a fruit or instrumentality, but this is evidence of the crime. And the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeal, applying California law, found that Lee and Meredith allowed the people to get the receipts. So I think with respect to the letters, and as much as the defendant has related before both juries, his mother's state of mind, that is, every time Lyle Menendez turned around, his mother was saying, "I hate your guts, you're a bastard, you're the reason for all of my problems," when in fact there are apparently letters describing the mother's state of mind at the time. Letters that the defendant himself has testified to, that he read, that he collected himself. He said that he collected them in the Beverly Hills house, he took them to Calabasas, and then returned them to the Beverly Hills house. We know through the declarations and through the testimony of Glenn Stevens that after defendant Lyle Menendez was arrested, he asked that those letters, and the letters that are in that box, back-in box, may very well be the letters that he collected from the house that he wanted to retain, that he, after being arrested, wanted to make sure that his attorneys got the box of the letters to show that it was, in fact, relevant in this case. So I think that counsel claiming that the Lee, Meredith, and Fairbank line of cases is limited to fruits and instrumentalities is not accurate, and that Clutchette and Russian extends that.
All right, anything further?
Yes, just 2 points in response to that. One, the court's reference to Lyle Menendez's testimony and cross-examination about additional letters. It was my recollection that the defense objected to that line of questioning, and the court, over objection, ordered him to answer those questions.
Yeah, the objection had to do with the fact that there was this impending or imminent hearing that was going to take place. But the questioning had nothing to do with this hearing, but had to do with proper scope of cross-examination, which clearly was touched on when the defendant referred to having seen some letters and The fact that later on a motion was filed and calendared for hearing relating to what ultimately happened with those letters certainly could not foreclose the prosecution from a full range of cross-examination on the general subject. And the court ruled in that way that the fact that counsel want to have the matter litigated shouldn't in any way chill the prosecution in its cross-examination. They're separate issues. So the objection was not well taken at the time. That's why it was overruled. And anything else?
Well, just to indicate that the record, I think, is ambiguous, as the court alluded to, or as we alluded to earlier, as to whether the letters in issue are the letters that are in the box, and that the prosecution, again, over objection, it appears would be entitled to further inquiry along those lines to establish that foundation before the court even reached this issue. And second of all, in regard to this federal case that was cited by the court itself read the state cases, and this federal case is based on the same state cases that the court read, and the court determined that the Fairbanks line of cases did not extend as far as the prosecution has indicated. There's no persuasive analysis in this federal case to indicate why it should be extended beyond the reach of fruits and instrumentalities. This is a pre-115th federal case, so the court certainly didn't consider the implications of such a broad holding on the discovery scheme that we now have. And there are two other aspects of the federal case I think are worthy to note. First of all, the court points out at page 1470 of its opinion that the receipts provided the cornerstone of the prosecution's case against the defendant. So that, I think, statement fits it within the court's analysis, in which the court indicated fruits or instrumentalities, proceeds of the crime, things of that nature. So the receipts in that case were in the nature of fruits or instrumentalities of the crime. And the second thing that I think is worth pointing out to the court is that the federal decision deals with whether there was a violation of the Sixth Amendment right to counsel in the proceeding which took place there, in which the prosecution came into possession of these letters, and the federal court placed great weight on the fact that the government's role in that case was passive. And it says at page 1472, here the government's role was entirely passive. The police neither initiated the contact with Mrs. Chalette nor encouraged her to turn over the receipts. And here, of course, we have the prosecution issuing a subpoena to the defense lawyer. So their role is not in any way, shape, or form passive. So I think that also distinguishes the federal case. And I think Ms. Abramson wanted to add that.
I want to make the record clear on this issue of voluntariness. I certainly did not turn the box over to the court in any sense waiving or objection to the prosecution's right to discover it. The only reason the box was lodged with the court was so that the court could conduct a Fairbanks type analysis. And it would not have been brought in even for that purpose had the people not issued a subpoena to be taken, and had we not been simply as officers of the court trying to assist in a fact-finding process of whether or not the contents of that box fit the case law as we understood it. Now, if the court is interpreting that turnover as voluntary, then I will voluntarily ask to have the box back. And then I think we are in the real position that this issue presents. Documents lawfully in the possession of the defense, which do not fit the description of the lines of cases as to the nature of the documents. And that, I think, frames the question of whether the defendant himself or through defense counsel. And I should just indicate, so that the record is factually clear, I was holding that box of documents as custodian for Ms. Lansing because of the security setup in my office. I held all original materials in the case because I have secure facilities and she does not. And the only reason I had possession of it was as custodian for her so that it could be locked up in the safe. So in fact, the box belongs in her possession, and then the question is whether the court should compel Ms. Lansing to turn those documents over, or Mr. Menendez to request his attorney to turn them over.
Yeah, if I may.
All right.
In Clutchette versus Russian, the way that the Sixth Amendment was implicated was that the wife of the defendant worked for the defense counsel. She's the one that turned over the evidence. So we don't have that situation here. We issued a subpoena to get this information. And on page 1472 of the Clutchette versus Russian case, the court states, the receipts themselves, however, were not. Once the defense attorney removed them from their original location, California law requires that a defense attorney must, after a reasonable time, turn evidence taken from its original resting place over to the prosecution based on People versus Lee and People versus Meredith. The defense did not voluntarily or within a reasonable time turn over this evidence to us. We had to issue a subpoena ducis tecum to get this. So it was based on that this came to light. In fact, had we not issued the subpoena ducis tecum, they still would have had a duty to turn this over. And I doubt that they would have unless we had issued that subpoena. So it's properly before this court.
Judge, can I make one request?
Yes.
Which is, the prosecution has indicated it's going to be cross-examining Lyle Menendez throughout the entirety of today's court session. And before the court rules on this, I would like the opportunity to review yesterday's transcript to see exactly what he said with reference to these letters and the context in which that came up, and also to locate the direct examination and compare it to what was said on the cross.
Well, let me inquire of the prosecution, how long is your examination going to be?
I think it will take the entirety of the day, Your Honor.
All right. These particular documents, by the way, that we're talking about are not extensive, and the court is not contemplating turning over all of the contents of the box, just these specific documents. And in response to Mr. Kuriyama, again, relating back to what I said in March, the prosecution could not subpoena or request an order of the court for the defense to produce any and all documents that were turned over by the defendant to the defense counsel. So just because there is a document or documents that were turned over by the defense to defense counsel does not necessarily make that material subject to discovery or obligation by the defense to turn it over to the prosecution under the authority of these cases you cite. If that were true, then clearly counsel would be obligated to turn over their entire files to the prosecution. And we know that's not the law, and it could never be the law. So there has to be some limit on it and some restrictions. And as I view it, this case has gotten to that posture where the issue has crystallized because of the nature of the examination. And there might even be further examination on that subject before the issue is resolved. I don't know. But the prosecution clearly could not seek all of the documents or items that might have been turned over by the defense. And I haven't heard that you were asking for every letter that the defendant has in his possession reflecting the mother's state of mind or the father's state of mind, every piece of writing that the mother or father ever wrote that reflected the mother or father's state of mind in regards to the defendants.
Skating for over 45 years has taken a toll on my body. I take Cunol turmeric because it helps with healthy joints and inflammation support. Why Cunol? It has superior absorption compared to regular turmeric. Cunol, the brand I trust.
Sought to have the defense open up their files. We merely issued that subpoena ducis tecum with respect to the box as related by Mr. Glenn Stevens that he turned over to the defense. So it's a finite, it's a box of letters that we can describe with particularity.
And if I might respond just to a factual issue here and make an offer of proof to clarify it. Our understanding of the reason for the subpoena ducis tecum was because Mr. Stevens told.
Well, you don't have to make an offer of proof on that. It's right in the subpoena. It's a declaration.
It had to do with the fact that he claimed to have seen a letter from Jose Menendez to Lyle Menendez, talking about how much he loved him. Now,
Well, he also had seen a letter from Mrs. Menendez to Mr. Menendez.
but our point was that we were prepared, if that information had been elicited from Mr. Stevens, we were prepared to call the person to whom he brought that box, who would have testified that Mr. Stevens was lying.
We're not talking about that. As I said, that is not an issue at this point, whether or not the box was turned over to Mr. Chaliff, the timing of it, the specifics as to what was in it, although the defense sought to elicit that information during the direct examination of, or cross-examination of Mr. Stevens. Those issues are not being discussed. Those are separate issues and could relate to attorney-client conversations or privilege, not conversations, but attorney-client privilege issues relating to whether some document was turned over to counsel or items turned over to counsel at a certain time. And that's a separate issue, and even the Clochette case makes note of that, the fact that there was careful efforts made by the court to insulate the trier of fact from the circumstances of how the documents were uncovered. Just the fact that the documents existed and were produced was the significant issue in that case, and the only one that the jury had to deal with. Is there any objection to permitting counsel to review the transcript before final resolution of this?
The only hesitation is, Your Honor, I would like, if we are going to be given access, I'd like to at least be able to read it before.
Well, obviously, that's why I said that it's not voluminous. It's not that lengthy, but I'll certainly give you time to do it.
Okay,
I'm not going to.
Sufficient time to read them, then yeah, that's fine with me. My recollection of Lyle Menendez's answer was that it was equivocal whether or not he'd read them. I think the final thing was I might have, or I could
That's
have.
what I told you when I reviewed my notes. That's what I said.
And I think that's, I mean, I don't think it's going to get any better for the defense than that, but that's my recollection.
Well, now that we've been discussing it at great length, who knows what will happen next. All right, let's go on then to the next issue. And that has to do with the use of the word sociopath and the defense objection to it. There was reference by counsel to the testimony of the defendant in that regard, his direct examination. The court had ruled on the subject prior to the testimony of Dr. Oziel in relationship to his notes of his conversations with the defendants that was subject of our earlier hearing. And the notes are contained on Exhibit 62, and the reference was on page 14 of that exhibit. And the court also reviewed the transcript of those proceedings, volumes 58 and volume 57. And the bailiff has indicated that there are jurors in the hallway, so we'll take a break here just for a minute or two, let them come in. All right, the jurors have entered the jury room. One additional point in relationship to the subject of the contents of that box. If counsel have any authority that they want to cite to the court specifically on the issue of questioning a defendant about an exhibit or item that has not yet been produced and whether it's appropriate to request that he produce it and or that the court order it be produced. Any of those subjects, I'd be more than happy to review them as well. Bearing in mind the scenario here where the documents are already in possession of the court. Okay, let the jury in then. All right, the jurors are all in the jury room. council have already discussed this subject regarding the use of the word sociopath. Other than what you have already said, is there anything additionally that either side wishes to offer?
Your Honor, I don't know if I cited to the court yesterday. I just wanted to make reference to page 8671 of volume 58, where Dr. Oziel testified in the 402 hearing that Lyle Menendez was the one who brought up the question about what a sociopath was. And I think that's reflected, as the court pointed out, on page 14. And because of that, and in contrast to his testimony here in court on Monday, I believe Mr. Byrd is looking for the reference in the transcript, it appears that people should now be permitted to inquire on this topic because it is at odds with Mr. Menendez's version of how this discussion took place.
Well, my recollection of the defendant's testimony is that neither he nor his brother agreed with either description of the type of murder as set forth by Dr. Oziel, but felt that the second category was closer than the first, but neither agreed or signed on with either of those categories. And that is in conflict with the testimony of Dr. Oziel in the 402 hearings that both defendants looked at each other and agreed that they were sociopaths and fit the second description, which is at odds with the defendant's testimony here.
Additionally, he has described his relationship with Dr. Oziel during that session as being taking a very passive role and merely agreeing. It appears by him asking the question about what a sociopath is that he was not in fact taking a passive role.
Well, the specific answer, I think, is being referred to as at page 1475 out. And the question is, did you say to him neither one of those fit? Answer, I believe I said that it wasn't really either of them, but it was more like the second one is what one of us said that. It may have been myself. So that's not a passive role. He's indicating that I believe I said it wasn't really either of them, but it was more like the second one. And he also is convinced that it may have been himself who said that. So I don't think it's accurate to say that he was taking a passive role in this, and that it seems to me that he is signing on to the second version there. And as the court indicated in ruling, in excluding the term sociopath, the purpose, this is at page 8682 of the proceedings of July 30th, where the court said, in excluding reference to the term, that the real purpose of the evidence is to lay out a definition for the defendants and provide them with an opportunity to accept or reject that particular definition or description. And there's no need to use the specific word, which does have prejudicial effect. And Ms. Lansing, in her direct examination, Mr. Menendez, worked precisely with the definition which had been worked out in the pretrial ruling. She read to Mr. Menendez the exact testimony that Dr. Oziel gave, and the upshot of it was the answer that I just read to the court. So I don't see how the term sociopath is somehow an issue or is somehow less prejudicial. And as the court will recall, the danger of that term is that it comes up in the context of Dr. Oziel making repeated references to it during the course of the session. And that repeated reference was based in part on his long and privileged contact with the brothers and with the family. So there were privilege concerns in not getting into that issue, as well as the prejudicial nature of the term itself. And it adds nothing to rebutting what he said on direct examination to somehow interject the term sociopath. The prosecution can work with the definitions which Dr. Oziel testified to and cross-examine along those lines without making reference to this term.
Well, Your Honor, if I might be heard.
Yes.
I think one of the other concerns was that Dr. Oziel was never qualified as an expert. The people urged repeatedly and in fact objected to questions of mine on the grounds that they would require expertise and he was not being called as an expert witness. we would then have to litigate what Dr. Oziel's idea of a sociopath is and what definition of a sociopath he gave, and whether his repeated references to sociopathy in those notes is legitimate and is within his expertise and is within the standard of care and what's appropriate in healthcare professionals, et cetera, et cetera. And I think it's merely a negative pejorative label that doesn't illuminate the people's theory, or Dr. Oziel's theory for that matter, of what the nature of the homicide was.
Well, as Oziel described it in his statement, page 14 of Exhibit 62, and in his testimony, this whole issue came up during discussions with the defendants about the homicides and their planning of it, and also in relationship, in his view, in his opinion, in relationship to the earlier burglaries that had been committed, and that the word sociopath was used, and in that context, and the defendant, Lyle Menendez, asked what the term meant. This puts the conversation in a different context. The defendant has indicated that he never mentioned, and his brother never mentioned, why these killings occurred in any way. They just went there and listened to Dr. Oziel to see whether Dr. Oziel somehow could figure out why it happened, even though they wouldn't tell him why it happened, but they would be willing to sit there and have Dr. Oziel figure out, if he could, why they did what they did. So it seems to me that the way this evidence has been presented does alter the reality of the conversation, that there was more to it than just out of the blue Dr. Oziel describing two types of murders. He did so at the instance or insistence of the or inquiry of the defendant as to definition of sociopathic murder, and he did so in that context. So that's how it came out, and it does tend to alter the nature of that conversation, and it does so by removing one word that counsel for the defense has referred to as a buzzword, and the court indicated that, as counsel correctly states, that the court used an analysis under Section 352 of the Evidence Code at that time, but indicated further in the same transcript in reference to the cross-examination of Dr. Oziel, without ever getting to this stage of the proceedings, because the court had no way of knowing at the time this hearing occurred on July the 30th, what, if anything, the defendant would say about this conversation. The court indicated that regarding the description of two types of murders and the balance of that conversation on page 86, 83, as I stated, quote, it could very well be, depending on how cross-examination occurs, that some of these things would come out. I don't know what the examination will be, end quote. And although that was in reference to the cross-examination of Dr. Oziel, clearly now that we're in the position of having heard the direct examination of the defendant, the context of how this came out is at issue.
I would just like to say that it should not be an issue for my client, who has not testified about any of this yet. And that whatever his brother's testimony may have been about, whatever he wants to say about that discussion, so prejudicial a piece of evidence as labeling these young men sociopaths by the good Dr. Oziel should not be admitted in front of Eric Menendez's jury unless through Eric Menendez's testimony he somehow opens the door to that.
All right, Mr. Bird, you wanted to say something?
Yes, Your Honor, as to Lyle Menendez and as to the 352 analysis that the court seems to be going through at this point. I'd ask the court to also take into account that if the court permitted cross-examination along these lines, it's our offer of proof that there would be a denial In other words, if Ms. Bizanich confronted Lyle Menendez, didn't you use the term sociopath, or wasn't there a discussion about it along the lines that Dr. Oziel said it took place, he would say, no, that's not true. And given that denial, it seems that at that point, the people, in order to prove up this issue, which is our position, does not go to the gist of what's being controverted here. But in order to prove up that issue, we have to revisit with Dr. Oziel. The jury has heard a version of this conversation which did not include the term sociopath. And the prosecution, to rebut the inconsistency, the only rebuttal that could be forthcoming was that the court ruled that he should modify his testimony in some way to exclude reference to that. And we're then into a whole situation of trying to explain why he gave the direct testimony that he did. And all of this for the purpose of interjecting the term sociopath when Lyle Menendez has already admitted during cross-examination that he thinks he signed on to the second version. So
Well,
I don't think I'm not sure where it gets us in terms of 352 issues and being substantially probative versus the undue consumption of time and the collateral issues which it raises.
Yes.
The defense moved to keep this from the jury. The defense then chose to cross-examine or do direct examination of Lyle Menendez and is now seeking to somehow say that because they raised the issue, but because to prove it up would require an extra amount of time, that we should be foreclosed. So that means they can make a motion, exploit it, and then prevent the people from getting at the truth because they have been able to exploit this motion that they made. And that seems just to be very unfair. They So the way the defense has engineered this from bringing out what really happened.
All right. I have reviewed the entirety of the defendant Lyle Menendez's testimony in this regard, not just the portion submitted during this argument. My view is that under Section 352 of the Evidence Code, as the issue now presents itself to the court, the probative value of the use of this word substantially outweighs any prejudicial effect, that the context of the conversation should be before the trier of fact. I don't find that this word by itself is prejudicial to the extent that it would foreclose its admissibility, but that the probative value of it substantially outweighs its prejudicial effect in the context of how this conversation did occur. And if the defendant denies that it occurred, then at some later time, if the matter is subject to further evidence, then we'll have to deal with it at that point as to how that evidence is introduced. As far as the objection by the defendant, Eric Menendez, to reference to this, do the people wish to be heard on that?
Well, Your Honor, the reason his testimony on Monday at page 14748 at line, starting at line 19, he says, yeah, I'm not sure which one of us picked, but I know that we both agreed that it was more. Neither one fit. It certainly wasn't the first one. So the statement that he's going to now make is an adoptive admission by his brother. If certainly we were allowed to put it on in front of both juries through the testimony of Dr. Oziel that this conversation was in fact held and it was just edited, why can't the defendant, who was another witness to the conversation, offer the same type of evidence? It's a statement of Eric Menendez offered against him by the prosecution under 1220 and 1221. It is admissible.
Well, Your Honor, I think the testimony of Lyle Menendez on that point is not sufficient to establish that there is a statement by Eric Menendez along these lines, nor can Lyle Menendez speak for what Eric Menendez's mental state may have been, which seems to be what he was saying, that he didn't feel it exactly fit, but he, Lyle Menendez, signed on to the second version. We've yet to hear what, if anything, Eric Menendez would say about that conversation. And to inject sociopathy, an extremely negative and pejorative, and of course in this case erroneous term, to describe my client when he has done nothing to violate the rules under which that term was kept out, when we have objected all along to Lyle Menendez testifying in front of Eric Menendez's jury, I think is unfair.
All right, whether it's clearly erroneous, the defendants, according to Dr. Oziel, agreed with that characterization. And the court finds that this was part of a conversation that was one that Eric Menendez participated in. He was present for it. He was involved in it. And the defendant, Lyle Menendez, is a witness to that conversation as such. And it, if depending on the nature of the response of Eric Menendez, it is either an adoptive admission or an admission. Therefore, the testimony is evidence that should be heard by both juries in that regard.
The court's alluded to section 352. It's also Lyle Menendez's objection that this is improper character evidence, and also that it's privileged, because Dr. Oziel's characterization is based on privilege sessions which took place prior to this conversation. So
Okay.
that's according to the administration.
Yeah. As far as the privilege issue, this was specifically a conversation that related to the commission of these crimes, and if anything, related possibly to the commission of the burglaries as part of the overall discussion, as indicated by Dr. Oziel. And that those matters are not privileged, are not subject to the claim of privilege that have been waived by the proceedings that have so far been conducted in this matter, and therefore are not subject to a claim of privilege. As far as character evidence, again, this was just a descriptive phrase used to describe the individuals, just as if Dr. Oziel used the phrase cold-blooded, calculated murderer, and the defendant agreed or disagreed with that. And it'd be no different than that. So it's not character evidence in any way. And this was, again, not offered by the prosecution as a diagnosis by Dr. Oziel, but a specific reference to definitions provided to the defendants and their opportunity to agree or disagree with it. So the objections are overruled. All right, anything else before the jurors come out? I'll give counsel a 10-minute break and then we'll start up. I have a meeting to attend and I'm going to recess at 11:45, so 11:45. So we'll start in 10 minutes and then go until that time.
Ms. Lansing has some objections to my use of the 17-page letter. And I was thinking that we should have, I'm not going to get to it this morning. We could maybe have the jurors come back late from lunch and then do that. So we wouldn't keep them waiting any longer.
Well, as far as that 17-page letter, did you review it with her as to those things that you intended to do or not do?
Well, I told her I was going to use the whole letter, and her objections are, there are two specific ones and then some other ones. The two specific ones, one is there's a reference to Ms. Abramson, her first name, and she didn't want it in the letter. I said I could block that out. But as far as the, she also doesn't want the first 3 pages in evidence that deal with his business plans. And I intended to use those in cross-examination.
All right. Well, without, can you proceed without those for a while and go to other portions of the letter, the document?
Well, I'm not going to get to it this morning.
All right. But are you saying you have to use the whole document at once and not?
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm going to discuss with him the preparation of the letter and where it was and things like that. So, you know, in terms of, and then go through the content with him.
Okay, that's going to be in front of the Lyle Menendez jury only.
Right. So, and it won't be till, and it may not be till tomorrow morning now. So I just wanted the court to know so we don't have the jury waiting to discuss it if we can accomplish that.
All right, but unless I have some idea as to how long it'll take to do it, it's hard to give an estimate. I don't know how many objections there are.
Yeah, I don't either. I just know there was, those two objections are the ones that I've been told about.
Well, my indication was before, when we talked about it, that some of this will just have to wait till questions are asked and objections made. I don't see that we should preview the entire cross-examination and go through each and every one of these things. If there are highly inflammatory, prejudicial material in there that specifically as a subject of objection, we perhaps could deal with that, but not the entirety of it. Most of it is not in that category.
Some of it's just dull. But I have a blow up of it, and that's the problem. I can't use the blow up on the board while I'm cross-examining him about the original. And so I think that's, so the jury's going to see it if they can read the handwriting while I'm questioning.
The business contacts deal with the area, the concert promotion.
Yeah, I understand that. And as I understood it, the prosecution was not going to go into that, or there was going to be a hearing prior to going into that. So that's one issue that you could hold off on and go into other matters. I don't see why, I don't want to tell you how to do your cross-examination, but I don't see why you have to do it all at one time if there are portions of that letter that relate to certain issues and portions that don't.
Well, once I'm through with the letter, I'll be through with cross-examination.
Well, you think about it as to how you want to do it and when you want to do your timing, time the hearing as to how long you think it'll take, and then we'll deal with it at some time today if we get to that stage. But again, let's take a 5-minute recess or 6-minute recess. We'll resume at 25 to the hour, at which time we'll have both juries in the courtroom and the defendant on the witness stand.
Skating for over 45 years has taken a toll on my body. I take Cunol turmeric because it helps with healthy joints and inflammation support. Why Cunol? It has superior absorption compared to regular turmeric. Cunol, the brand I trust.
Joseph Lyle Menendez.
All right, you're still under oath. You may continue your cross-examination.
Thank you. Mr. Menendez, do you know what city you were in the last weekend in July of 1989?
I think either New Jersey or California. But and that would probably be, Princeton or Los Angeles. I'm not really sure though.
Did your family go on a trip? I think you testified yesterday that your family, excluding you, went on a trip to Kalamazoo. Is that correct?
Right.
Did anyone go to Florida that summer before your parents were killed?
Yes.
Who went to Florida and when was it?
I had been in Florida for a short period of time, playing tennis, and I believe visiting my aunt.
Is that Aunt Marta?
Yes.
Do you remember when it was you were in Florida?
Sometime during that summer, I believe just once. I may have gone back twice.
And when you said you were playing tennis, was that in some sort of tournament or was it a camp or what was it?
No, we played in they had different tennis camps down there, and basically I wasn't in the camp, but they had, the camp was mostly for younger players, but I was playing with the professionals that would come into the town. Can't remember the names, but there were some professional players that came in. I would play with them. Guys on the pro tour, and they would play at the different camps down there.
Was your brother with you during this period of time that you've just described?
I believe he came down at some point to train for a couple days. And then, he was traveling with my parents for back and forth to different tournaments in Tennessee and Kalamazoo, like you said. And I think there was at least one other one. And at some point, I think he came down there and trained.
And when he came down there and trained, was he with your parents at that time or was he alone?
No, he just came by himself.
And how long were you there during that trip?
Not a couple days, I believe. I was supposed to be there longer, and then just didn't stay the full amount of time that I was supposed to be there and left early.
When you left early, where did you go?
I believe either New Jersey or California. Probably California.
But you're not sure.
Right.
And I think you said there could have been another trip to Florida that summer.
There might have been another trip before the tennis one, but I'm not positive. I could be mistaken.
Do you know whether or not your brother was with you on that other trip to Florida?
No.
No, you don't know. Is that correct?
No, he wasn't with me.
Oh, okay. Now, I believe you testified that you were aware of the fact that there were rifles inside of your parents' home, correct?
Yes.
And you knew that before the deaths of your parents.
Right.
Did you think that those rifles were going to play a role in your father's plan to kill you?
No, I didn't know, but I did not think that she would use rifles. I figured she would have different weapons.
Well, what different weapons? When you say she, I take it you're referring to your mother.
Yes.
Okay. And what different weapons did you think your mother would have?
Just special weapons for that purpose. That would not, I doubted she would use rifles.
Well, special weapons for the purpose of what?
For the purpose of killing us.
And what special weapons are you talking about?
Again, I did not have anything specific in mind, but I don't think I was expecting she would use rifles. I figured she would use some sort of handgun or something of that sort that didn't make noise, obviously.
You think a handgun doesn't make noise?
Well, it can be silenced in some way, I assume.
Right, but do you understand it's illegal to possess a silencer, so it's difficult to get them?
Yes, and obviously it would be illegal to kill us too, but I don't think that would be the concern. If she was going to do it, I thought she would use some sort of weapon of that sort, but not the rifles.
So you thought your mother was going to arm herself with a handgun and a silencer, is that correct?
I didn't think anything in particular. I really wasn't saying we know they're going to do it this way. Let's look around for this or that to help us find out. I just knew that it was going to happen.
Now, I believe you indicated earlier that you thought your mother might poison you. Is that correct?
Right.
When she was in her suicidal state, correct?
Right.
Did you consider that she might poison you and your brother as a means of getting rid of you during this week in August?
It was talked about, but I didn't believe she would do that way.
Why did you think she wouldn't poison you?
I just felt that, just didn't think she would poison me. We were going through the possibilities and basically felt that she would do it in a more direct way and it would just sort of happen suddenly when we didn't know about it. And then they would get rid of us and nobody would know any better. And I didn't think it would be poison or anything. I just didn't think that it would be poison. But we did talk about it. And obviously if she prepared some special meal for us, said, here, eat this, we were not going to eat it. But assuming that didn't happen, we didn't just expect that it would be poison.
You said you were talking about the possibilities. So what possibilities were you talking about?
That my dad could have hired somebody to do it, like on the boat trip. There could be people that were there for that purpose. Or he could just, which I thought was the more likely, just do it himself with my mother where nobody else knew, to minimize the risk for himself.
You were very concerned for your personal safety at this time, weren't you?
Yes.
Okay. And so you thought through the various methods your parents might use so that you could take precautions to prevent that. For instance, you said that you weren't going to eat a specially prepared meal, correct?
Right.
Did you take precautions against getting smothered in the middle of the night?
I slept with a gun in my bed.
Now, I think you indicated that that gun was loaded. Is that correct?
Right.
When you loaded the gun, how many rounds did you put into it?
I loaded them Friday, and I'm not exactly sure how many rounds, but I'm sure I put in several.
Well, did you see the testimony of the gentleman from the Sheriff's Department, Mr. Van Horn, Deputy Van Horn, who talked about the Mossberg shotgun?
Yes.
Okay. Did that shotgun that he brought into court look similar to the ones that you and your brother purchased?
Similar.
Okay, I remember he testified that the stock was different.
Yeah, there were some things that I sort of remember that were different, but
All right,
they seemed pretty close.
the same size, right?
I believe so, yeah.
What differences do you recall about the gun you purchased versus the gun that Deputy Van Horn brought to court?
I really couldn't tell you anything specific other than it just looked different. Just didn't recognize it. It wasn't like I saw it and I said, oh, that looked sort of like the gun we had. It was just sort of similar. I mean, it was a shotgun, but I just remember thinking, it's not the same.
By the way, where are the guns now?
I assume they're either still where my brother ran down the hill, or I assume they're still there.
And after your parents were killed and you knew that you might be a suspect, did you ever go back and look for those guns?
Yes.
Were you able to find them?
No.
How many times did you go to look for the guns?
Just the one time.
On one occasion?
Right.
Did you take anyone with you?
No.
You went alone?
Yes.
Now, I believe you indicated that it was your brother who secreted the shotguns off of Mulholland while you waited and turned the car around, correct?
What does secreted mean exactly?
Hid.
Yes.
And so were you watching where he put the guns, or were you concerned with turning the car around?
I didn't really know where he put the gun. I just had a vague idea of where we were, and I tried to go back and find him at some point and wasn't able to do that.
When was it that you went back and looked for the guns?
Very shortly before I was arrested.
Would that have been in March? Was that during
Yes, I think so.
And you flew out from New Jersey with some friends during that trip, didn't you?
Yes.
And who are the friends that you flew out from New Jersey with?
I flew out with Glenn Stevens, Hayden, and I believe that's it, I think.
And I take it they were not with you when you went back to look for the guns. Is that correct?
No, they were in Las Vegas.
Did you discuss with your brother where he had placed them before you went to look for them in March of 1990?
No, he was traveling in Israel.
I believe you indicated that you loaded, I think you said when you talked about loading the guns. Did you load both the guns? Did you mean to say I loaded them, or did you load one gun?
What point in the weekend are you referring to?
When the first time you ever loaded the shotguns that you and your
Right.
brother purchased on the night of the 18th.
Right. We loaded them at some point in the car. Maybe when we got outside. I really don't remember exactly. We loaded them before we got home, for sure. And there was some concern as to whether I had bought the right kind of ammunition that would go with that gun. So I wasn't even sure if it would work. So that's why we went to the other gun store to ask the guy.
Now, what day was it that you went to the other gun store to ask about the correctness of the ammunition?
Like the middle of the day on Saturday.
And when you loaded the gun in the car, did you take the plug out so that you could put more rounds in the gun?
I don't believe so.
Did you know that could be done?
I think either the lady or there might have been another gentleman at the store that was sort of explaining the basic of how the gun worked, and was, I think, showing us that part of it too. But I'm not really sure that I paid much attention to it and did anything with that.
Well, when you loaded the gun, did you put 3 rounds in the gun, or did you put more in the first time you loaded it?
I really can't remember. It would be about 3. Could be more.
How did you know how to load a shotgun?
Just from what the lady had said and just experimenting.
Okay, where did you experiment?
In the car at some point.
Now,
It
was this-
seemed very easy. Just seemed to load it in the bottom, like Mr. Van Horn said.
All right,
So it wasn't complicated.
all right. And so from the demonstration that this woman gave you, and I take it that was Mrs. Geyer who testified from the Big Five store. Is that the woman you're speaking of?
Yes, her, and there was also another gentleman that helped us initially, if I remember it correctly, before she came over for the actual purchase.
At the Big Five store?
I believe so.
All right. And this gentleman also demonstrated how to load the weapon. Is that correct?
Yes.
Now, if you were in fear of both your mother and your father, did you want to have more than 3 rounds in your shotgun? In case you missed.
Well, I figured 3 rounds was enough. I may have loaded more. I don't remember. I remember loading several rounds, and that's just basically all I remember.
Now, the rifles that were in the house, did you ever consider just buying ammunition for them and using the rifles in the house so that there would be no possibility of paperwork connecting you to the purchase of new weapons?
No, we never were concerned about paperwork, but we did discuss what you just said about the rifles. And I believe it was my brother's suggestion Thursday night. And I told him that I didn't think that was a good idea because I thought they would notice that they were missing. And also, he was thinking that there would be handguns there also if there were rifles, because we really didn't know what kind of weapons my parents had exactly. And I just felt they might be missing.
When was it Thursday night that you talked to your brother about weapons? I believe you indicated that you spoke to your father sometime, it would have been after 11:30 if you got home at 11, and was gone with your mother for at least a half an hour. Then you spoke with your father. And when was it you spoke with your brother?
Not long after that, he came running up with my mother.
And where were you physically located when your brother came running up with your mother?
In the bedroom.
Which bedroom?
There's just one. It's my bedroom in that guest house.
Okay. And what was going on when your brother and your mother came running up?
What was going on with me?
What were they doing?
He ran up first, and he started screaming that Mom knows, and he was frantic. And I was saying, knows what? And he was saying about me and Dad. And then it was at that point that my mother, who I guess had been chasing him, because I had heard the argument, or at least the screaming, ran up the stairs, and she started screaming at my brother, and I confronted her about how she could have known all these years. And that's when she said that I knew and that nobody had ever helped her and that I knew what was going on. And I said something in denial of that, and she just said that she hated us and called us some names and ran out.
Did she threaten you at that time with death?
No.
And you had seen your mother upset on other occasions before this particular day, correct?
Yes.
And was she any more upset than on other occasions when you'd seen her?
She was more upset through that week, but I wouldn't say she was more upset at that moment. She was just out of control, similar to other times.
Similar to times that you saw when you were 12, 13 years old, right?
Similar.
Now, I think you indicated you heard screaming you heard screaming before you actually saw your brother, is that correct?
Right.
And you were inside the guest house when you heard the screaming?
Yeah, I was somewhere in the guest house when I heard the scream.
Could you tell from which direction the screaming was coming?
Yes.
Where?
It was coming from the main house.
And the guest house is in the back of the house and is basically right on the alley, is that correct?
Right.
And I think it's a 2-story guest house?
Right.
And that your bedroom was on the 2nd floor?
Right.
And the maid's quarters in your parents' house was at the back of the main house, correct?
Right.
And so that was at the back of the house that abutted the tennis court, correct?
Right.
Okay. Now, when you went to San Diego and used Donovan Goudreau's driver's license, is it your testimony that neither you nor your brother had available any kind of California driver's license?
That's right.
And that's why you used his driver's license, is that correct?
That's right.
And you weren't concerned about tracing the documents, purchasing those shotguns back to you, is that correct?
No.
And that wasn't why you drove all the way to San Diego to purchase the guns, correct?
Right.
You just drove there because you happened to find yourself there during your discussion with your brother.
Right, after we had gone to the store in L.A.
Now, prior to your father's death, had you ever spoken to him about a man named Teddy Schneider?
The name doesn't ring a bell, so I don't know.
Did you ever talk to your father about a murder that had occurred in early August in the San Fernando Valley, where the victim had been someone involved in the video pornography business?
I'm going to object to calling for hearsay. No foundation.
I never either heard of it or discussed it with him.
Now, when you went to San Diego, I believe you indicated that you gave a false address for Donovan Goudreau's driver's license. In other words, you or your brother told Ms. Geyer a false address. Is that correct?
No.
You didn't give a false address?
Well, I didn't give any address. I was walking around in the store, and my brother was filling out the forms, and I don't even,
Well, did you discuss with him the fact that you should probably use an address in San Diego in order to add some realism to this transaction?
No, we figured he would use the address off the license.
Well, I believe you testified in your direct examination that you thought that you needed to have a place near San Diego, and so you made up an address. Do you remember testifying to that on direct examination?
I don't remember it that way.
Well, how do you remember it?
Are you asking about his testimony or
No.
about what happened?
How do you remember what happened?
I just remember the long discussion about the fact that we needed an ID, and then deciding to use Donovan's license. And then the fact that Eric was going to have to be the one to present the ID and so on, and him going ahead and doing that. And it's possible that there was some discussion about where to they would ask for a local address, but I don't really remember that.
Now, do you know how August Street was chosen? In other words, did you and your brother go looking for a street in San Diego before you went to purchase the guns?
No.
Okay. Are you aware of the testimony of Detective Zoller that there is, in fact, an August Street in San Diego, just not that particular number that your brother
Right.
chose?
Right. My understanding is that my brother was there. We were going to use the address off the license. For whatever reason, he could not use the address off the license. I don't know if she was holding it in the wrong way, or he didn't want to look like he was looking at the license. He just hadn't thought of it, and he was there. And I didn't know this until after we were arrested, and I seen the records and people talked about it, but that he just sort of panicked and had to make up an address and just use the month. And then he just wrote in an address, and he had somehow found the zip code out. And so he just wrote it out.
Okay, so your brother just happened to pick a street that does, in fact, exist in San Diego, and also just happened to get the zip code?
No, there was something that was in front of him that had the zip code to San Diego. So that wasn't hard. So he just used the zip code. I don't know. That's sort of my understanding. I'm trying to remember what I talked about with my brother. He may have even asked her the zip code. But the street, he said he got from just picking the month, because I believe that we were supposed to just use the address off the license, and just expected him to do that. So he sort of just panicked and wrote an address. And I believe that I thought the testimony you're saying of Detective Zoller was that there wasn't even an address like that.
No, he said there was an August Street. There just wasn't a 15 on August Street.
One of my favorite supplements is Cunol turmeric. Turmeric helps with healthy joints and inflammation support, and Cunol has the #1 doctor recommended form of turmeric. Cunol, the brand I trust.
Right. There wasn't it was like in the 500s or something like that, he said, and my brother had just made up an address.
How was the decision made that your brother would use Donovan's license and not you?
Because it was his fake ID. He looked like him.
So it's your testimony that Donovan Goudreau's identification, his driver's license, looks like your brother?
Yes, very similar.
Now, in the application or in the records that were used, may I approach, please, Your Honor? Let me read it. All right, Mr. Menendez, in addition, there's a place of birth listed up here, and it's listed as Burlingame, California. Do you see that?
Yes.
Okay, was there any discussion between yourself and your brother as to choosing the place of birth?
There was no discussion that I remember between myself and my brother about anything on these forms, because we were not aware that we were going to have to fill out forms at all. This is my remembrance. I just thought you had to show ID and then you buy the guns. And the forms was a surprise, is what I remember. And my brother was just sort of left standing there trying his best to fill out this form. And that's why he was kind of hoping to copy from the license.
Why didn't you help your brother? Why didn't you go up with him and help him?
Because I was just walking around and just, I didn't want to look like I was sitting there helping him. Like, here's your address. I mean, he should know that.
Were you in any way trying to avoid the appearance of two people engaging in this transaction versus one person? So that later on, if the police came down, they wouldn't remember the transaction because only one person had been involved. Did you think about that?
No, I was at the counter for some period of time, and I had talked to the gentleman before the lady came over, and I was there buying ammunition, and we were clearly together, walked in the store together, left together. And there wasn't any concern for that at all.
Did you make any attempt to alter your appearance, such as wearing sunglasses or taking off your wig?
No.
Mr. Menendez, you and Donovan were very close, weren't you?
Yes.
And you knew a lot of things about Donovan Goodrow, right?
What he told me.
All right. Did you know where he'd been born?
No, I knew where he was from.
And where was he from?
Northern California, like San Francisco area.
Now, when you purchased the shotguns, did you think about the fact that if you used the shotguns, they would make a lot of noise?
Sure.
And what did you discuss with your brother in regards to that fact?
Nothing, actually.
Well, you had considered that if your mother was going to kill you, she was going to use a silencer, correct?
Right.
And I take it you thought your mother had some sort of connections where she could illegally purchase a silencer. Is that correct?
Sure.
Your mother had some sort of underground connections where she could buy illegal weapons. Was that your state of mind?
Well, I don't know anything about illegal weapons, but I figured whether she could get them or my dad could get them would not be something difficult at all for them.
During the period of time that you were in fear for your life, did you ever conduct a search of your family's home to see if there were other weapons there aside from the rifles that you had already known about?
No.
Why not?
It just didn't cross my mind to search through the house to look for weapons, and I wouldn't want to have been caught doing that.
Did you ever go in the kitchen and look at the kitchen knives and see if you thought any of them might be the weapon that would be used to murder you?
No, this was a very serious situation. This wasn't like when my mom chased me around with a knife in Pennington. This had nothing to do with knives. This was about us wanting to survive and whether they were going to kill us and when. So the knife thing is...
Well, a knife doesn't make any noise, does it, Mr. Menendez?
No, but I assume that if they're going to kill us, they were going to make sure that they killed us.
And that they made noise?
No, I assumed it would be in a way that didn't make noise.
Now, you are telling us here today that you were extremely concerned during this period of time, from Thursday night till Sunday night, with your personal safety.
More than extremely concerned. We were pretty desperate about it and losing sleep, not sleeping because we were staying up, not wanting to be attacked, asleep, and very fearful.
And you genuinely believed that your life was about to be ended. Is that correct?
Yes.
So you went to the police and you told them.
No.
Why couldn't you go to the police?
We had talked about Thursday night what we could do, and we talked about running away, and we talked about the police, telling relatives. We talked about the different possibilities of running away, and my brother basically trying to asking me, where could we go, and that they wouldn't find us, and no good answers. And based on the fact of who my mother was and my father's power, and I'd known all the things she had done to track down his girlfriend Louise and look through credit card receipts and photos, and there was an instance when I was in California and met some guy at a tournament out here. who came up to me and wanted to coach me. He was from New Jersey. I mentioned it to my mom, and she called every club in New Jersey and tracked the guy down and found him. And just because I said that it was a guy that had contacted me. So, I mean, she seemed to have these abilities, and we knew that, especially with the tracking down of Louise. So, I mean, we discussed pretty thoroughly running away and how we could do it, and, you know, going to other countries and so on, and basically felt completely that they would find us and they could find us wherever we went, and it was best to stay in the house. And we talked about the police too.
All the option you've discussed would have required you to give up the lifestyle that you'd been leading, correct?
Sure.
And you didn't want to do that, did you?
Well, at that point, we were concerned about surviving, but before Thursday, I didn't want to do that.
But after Thursday, when you were in genuine fear of your life, all the other options you could think of, aside from resorting to violence, would have required you to leave home and be on your own.
Right.
With no more support from your father.
Right.
And you still didn't want to do that, did you?
Well, not for that reason. If I felt I could have left home and had peace of mind somewhere and I wasn't going to be killed, I would have done that immediately. And we just didn't feel that we could do that.
Well, if you got to the police and you told them everything you've told the jury now, and your father had then killed you, it would have looked awfully suspicious that your father had killed you. In other words, you could have used publicity, or you could have used revelation of the facts to protect your life, correct?
Right, and we discussed that, and we had two problems with that. One is the fact that my dad was a very powerful, influential, well-known person in a small area, Beverly Hills, and would the police side with us on that, and would they believe us? Obviously, my parents denying that we were anything but the ideal family. And the main problem was, even if we had done that, what could we do? What could we do with the police? I mean, try to file charges or something? I mean, I just felt that if I had taken it to that step, we would definitely have put ourselves in a position to be killed, without a doubt. And I don't have any doubts that my father and mother would have killed us before we would ever get to a trial point or anything like that. And I really wasn't thinking that he could go to jail for what was happening, and therefore I would be safe. I just felt if I went to the police and I said, you know, this is what's happening, that they couldn't protect us, and that my dad would prefer to murder us, regardless of how suspicious it was, in some way, before he let himself be ruined and his reputation be ruined to that incredible degree. I mean, you have to understand what my brother was telling me on Friday and how sick these things were. And the idea of my mother having known this and my dad having done this, I felt that he would rather kill us and deal with whatever that held.
So you didn't think that your story, or that your version of what had happened in your family, could protect you. Is that what you're saying? No matter who you told it to?
That's right.
And even if you told it to police, you don't think you would have been believed. Is that correct?
Well, that's not that they would not have believed us. I didn't know. But it's just that I don't know if they could have done anything about it to the point of protecting us. Because unless you knew who my father was, and I knew him very well, and you've experienced the things that I've tried to talk about here, it's very difficult to understand how dangerous he and my mother are. I don't think, I don't know anything about other people that do this to their kids, but I just wasn't convinced that they could protect us or would really understand and believe how serious a threat it was. So we had no confidence at all in the police ability to help us.
You also had all your relatives who've come here and testified in front of these juries about the horrors of your family. Those relatives were available to you in 1989.
Right. And the only one that I saw that stood up to my dad that I got to see was my Aunt Terry, and she seemed to be ciphering everything that happened in my life to my mother. And, another thing that was going on is that they seemed to know everything that was happening in my life and in my brother's. They would find things out that nobody really knew. And and my mother would mention it, or I would be yelled at for it, or they would want me to explain it. And I could not figure out at that time how they were finding out all this information. And I just felt, it seemed like an incredible power on their part to be able to do all this. And then I found out later that it was because the phones were tapped, but I didn't know that at the time. And as far as my relatives, my two strongest relatives are my aunts. And, my Aunt Marta, like she said, sort of idolized my father business-wise and did not, they might have had an idea of that bad things were going on, but not these things. And whether they would have been able to protect us in the house and so on. And I didn't believe it was even a possibility.
But you didn't have to stay in the house, Mr. Menendez.
Right, but it wasn't about where I was or how I was living at that point. It was about living and surviving and not having to just, wake up in the night with a gun at your head wherever we were. So that was what our concern was. That's why we decided to stay in the house and just get protection instead.
During this period of time between Thursday night and Sunday night, did you play any tennis in the backyard of your parents' home?
Thursday night and Sunday
Between
night?
Thursday night and Sunday night, did you and your brother play any tennis on your family's tennis court?
No, definitely not.
And you specifically note here today that you did not play any tennis. You yourself did not play tennis during that period of time.
Right, we played tennis all the time back there, like the weekend before, but once this thing happened on Thursday, aside from maybe my brother playing Thursday morning, I don't believe we played any tennis.
I think you said it was Friday morning your brother played tennis.
No, I said that I believe that it was Thursday morning that he played tennis with Mark Heffernan.
Right, but you also indicated that you got up on Friday morning, you found your brother playing tennis.
Well, he wasn't playing tennis. He was practicing his serve. He wasn't playing with somebody.
All right, but he was on the tennis court with the tennis racket and tennis balls.
Right.
And it's your testimony that you did not play any kind of tennis, either by yourself or with anyone else during this time period. Is that correct?
That's right.
Okay. Now, on Sunday, August the 20th, what time was it that you woke up?
I guess around pretty early in the morning, I can't really place a time, but I would say somewhere between 7 and 9 o'clock, my brother woke me up to tell me what had happened Saturday night.
What did your brother tell you?
That Dad had tried to get in his room and that he had been sitting on the bed and thought that he might have to kill him if he came in the room. He was worried about where my mother was and that it was just this frantic situation, and he thought Dad was going to try and get him that night.
Did he tell you about what time this incident had occurred on Saturday? This was after you got home from the fishing trip?
Right.
Did he tell you what time this had occurred?
Very late. Right soon after I went to bed. I assume he didn't say what time, but it would have to be after I left, went to UCLA, came back, then went back outside after we had the fight with my mother. Then we talked, and then I went to my guest house. And so I guess it was right after that.
And at the time that you went back to the guest house and you left your little brother inside of the main house with your parents, you were still in mortal fear for your life. Is that correct?
Definitely at that point, after what my mother said, yes.
And you were so afraid that you went inside of the guest house and you went to sleep, correct?
No, I stayed up for many hours, but I knew that I couldn't just be awake for weeks and weeks straight. I didn't know how long this was going to go on, and so I just tried to sleep at some point after I had stayed up long enough.
Now, I believe you indicated then between 7 and 9, your brother came to you and recounted to you an absolutely terrifying incident that had occurred the night before, which furthered your belief that you were going to die, correct? In other words, when your brother told you what your father had done, did that add to your belief that you were going to die?
Certainly, yes.
Okay. And your brother didn't come to you right after it happened, but rather waited until between 7 and 9. Is that correct?
Yes, because he was afraid to come out of the room. The door was locked. My dad was demanding him to open the door. He thought Dad was going to break it down and he was going to have to shoot him. He was sitting there I believe he said he was sitting there on the bed with his gun and describing to me the situation. So he didn't come out. I guess at some point felt he could sort of venture out in the morning and got over to me.
Did you have a phone in the guest house?
Yes.
Was that your own phone line?
No. In the guest house?
Yes.
There were 3 lines, so I think I had all 3.
In the guest house?
Yeah.
Did your brother have his own phone line?
He had his own phone line.
And where was the phone located for your brother's phone line?
Well, they were located throughout the house. They rang in my parents' bedroom, they rang in the downstairs, and they rang. Well, it wouldn't have rung in my house. I think I just had my line and the main line, but I might even have had Eric's line.
All right. And did Eric have a telephone inside of his bedroom?
Sure, he could call me, and the phone would ring in my parents' bedroom, and he certainly wasn't going to do that. So,
Did your phone ring in your parents' bedroom?
yeah, the way my mom structured it is that all the lines rang everywhere in the house. That's why she was able to tap into Eric's line from her bedroom.
And so there was no way your brother could get a phone call to you while this terrifying incident was going on. Is that correct?
If he had felt that he could call, I'm sure he would have.
But you got no phone calls. Is that correct?
That's right.
And when he told you about this thing that had occurred, did you get an impression of how long before it had occurred? In other words, how many hours before he was telling you about it had this incident occurred?
I got the impression it was many hours before.
Okay. Now, you went shark fishing and you got home around what, midnight?
Somewhere around midnight, I think.
And then you and your brother went to UCLA to further discuss the situation.
Right.
And that was from what time to what time?
After that, when we got home, we left pretty much right away, and whatever time we got there, and we spent a half hour or more, I'm not sure, maybe even longer, just hanging out and also talking.
So you drove over to UCLA and you went to what, an athletic field or something and walked
Right.
around?
Yes.
So how long were you gone? What time did you return home?
I'm not good with the time because I wasn't wearing a watch or anything, but I would think it would be very late.
What's very late?
2:30, something like that, I think, and maybe 2 o'clock, something like that.
Now you stayed up for a long period of time after that, is that correct?
I stayed up usually till about 4 o'clock.
Now you said usually you stayed up till 4 a.m.?
Well, since Thursday, yes.
All right, so you were awake at least until 4 a.m., is that correct?
I can't say that's specifically what happened that night, and that's for sure the time, because I just would stay up for a couple hours, partly because it was difficult to sleep under the situation, but I was also feeling so exhausted that it was hard to sleep, but mostly because I wanted to stay up for a period of time, because I figured that we probably would be killed at night when we were sleeping, and it just felt like it would probably be some time after they felt I had fallen asleep, so I waited.
Mr. Menendez, you've had 4 years to think about the events that occurred between the 17th and the 20th of August. You've had 4 years to think about that. Are you telling me you can't recall what time you went to bed the morning that you killed your parents?
No, I can't recall.
Did you think it might be important?
Whether it's important or not, I can't recall.
All right, so then it's your testimony that you went to bed and that between 7 and 9 in the morning, your brother came and told you about this very explosive incident which had occurred the night before.
Right.
Did you ever hear any pounding or screaming coming from the main house before you went to sleep?
No.
Were you ever awakened by any such noises?
No.
So after you got up between 7 and 9 on the morning of the 20th, what did you next do?
On 20th? Nothing. I just stayed in the guest house and waited, and eventually my brother showed up again.
And did your brother tell you where he had been?
Well, we had discussed the night before that he would be out and then check in. And so when he woke me up in the morning, he just said he was going to be out driving around. So he didn't tell me where he had been, or at least I don't remember if he did.
Did you and your brother discuss the fact that it might look suspicious if he was gone from the house for long periods of time, if in fact you were trying to keep your parents from being suspicious?
No, we didn't, not during the day necessarily.
You and your brother had many discussions about how you were going to save your life during this period of time, correct?
Right.
And in fact, when you went to UCLA after you went on this fishing trip, that's what you were talking about, wasn't it?
Yes.
And what did you talk about at UCLA?
Well, we were mostly talking about the fact that nothing had happened on the fishing trip, and that I felt that this was relieving. My brother felt that it meant nothing, that they were still going to kill us, and it was just sort of this terrifying thing about the fact that you would think it was going to happen and then nothing would happen. And then they would say something or something would happen that would make you think it was going to happen again at some point. And then it was sort of up and down. So we were talking about that, just that we couldn't believe things had gotten to this point, and that we would, I believe in that conversation, stay apart the next day and just keep trying to go day by day.
During the last 3.5 years that you've been in custody, have you ever been housed next to your brother?
I was, yes, I have been.
And you've had ample time to speak to your brother during the last 3.5 years that you've been in custody, haven't you?
Yes, usually with other people around, but yes.
So your brother was gone, and at some point he checked back in with you. At what time was it that he checked back in with you, approximately?
12, maybe 11.
And where were you physically located when your brother checked back in with you?
I believe in the guest house. I was up, but had not decided to go into the main house yet, so I was somewhere in the house, either upstairs or downstairs or something.
Now, you had you already called Perry Berman by the time your brother checked in with you?
I had called Perry Berman at that point, yeah.
And from where did you call Perry Berman?
From one of the phones in my guest house.
Right. And what was the purpose of calling Perry Berman?
To set up something that evening and go out with him and be with somebody, which was also part of the things that we discussed the night before, that it would be safer to be with people and have plans.
Well, the night before you'd been with people, but you didn't feel comfortable. The night before you'd been with the crew from the fishing ship.
Right.
And you didn't feel comfortable.
That's right.
But you were going to feel comfortable with Perry because you didn't think Perry was going to kill you, correct?
No, Perry wasn't going to kill me.
And part of calling Perry was part of the plan that you and your brother had, correct?
No, it was just something we had discussed that we would have to, as best we could, try to be apart during the day, and at night sleep apart and not do anything that might get my dad or mom nervous, and then have plans at night so that it would be safer at night until the time when we would have to come back to the house.
You often slept inside the main house, though, didn't you?
Almost never.
Didn't you tell the police when you gave them your interview in September of 1989 that you often slept inside of the main house if the guest house bathroom wasn't working?
Right.
Okay, so why didn't you just tell your parents that the guest house bathroom wasn't working and go inside the house to be with your brother who was in mortal danger?
I just didn't do that. I thought that would be the kind of behavior that would be suspicious. It didn't even occur to me, but I doubt I would have, even if it had.
Well, you've indicated that you felt that you were smart enough to do the work at Princeton University, correct?
Right.
Okay. All you would have to do is do something to the toilet, go inside, take something out of the toilet, go inside the house and say, hey, the toilet's not working, I'm going to stay here. Because you were in fear of your life, right?
I mean, we could have done a lot of the things that you're suggesting. I'm just telling you what we did.
Right.
And that didn't occur to me.
And
Or it would have been a good idea, probably.
And what you did was you killed your parents and then began to spend their money, right?
Well, that's something that happened, but I don't think characterizing that way is putting it in the right context.
Well, why did you need to buy a Rolex watch 4 days after your parents were killed?
I didn't need to.
You wanted to.
Well, what happened that day is that my uncles had talked to my brother and I, and that I think it was mainly my brother needed to get suits for the memorial service in LA that was coming up, and also for the one that they were planning on New Jersey. And we were sort of cooped up in the hotel and told us to go out and do that, and we did. And we went to Bullock's at one of the shopping centers, and we went ahead and got the suits and so on and purchased that. And we were wandering around, and I was sort of down and kind of depressed and just wandering around into stores. And we were in the jewelry store, and I don't know why, but I just purchased the Rolexes. And at some point in the purchase, I started to feel awkward about it, probably for the reasons that, you're feeling awkward about it right now. And I called my uncle and asked him about it. And he said, don't worry about it. Just go ahead and do it. So I think it was my uncle, but it was some relative.
For the reasons that I'm feeling awkward about it right now?
Well,
What you just said?
I realize that, I look back and I think that it sounds awful, and I wish that I hadn't bought them. And it is a bad thing, but it wasn't for any specific reason. It was just something I was wandering in the store and I was feeling down, and I bought them.
So you just thought a $9,000 18 karat gold Rolex would go nicely with your funeral suit. Is that right?
No, I didn't. I really didn't think much about money in my life, and I just sort of bought things spur of the moment all the time, and this was just another thing.
May we approach, please, Your Honor?
Skating for over 45 years has taken a toll on my body. I take Qunol turmeric because it helps with healthy joints and inflammation support. Why Qunol? It has superior absorption compared to regular turmeric. Qunol, the brand I trust.
Mr. Menendez, at the same time that you purchased the Rolex watches, you also purchased the money clips. Do you remember the testimony from Ms. Mahar that you purchased money clips?
Yes, I remember the testimony.
Okay, did you in fact purchase money clips?
But she says we did. We did. I don't actually remember it, but I'm sure we did.
And do you remember that during that transaction you spent approximately $15,000, correct?
Right.
Okay, now who were the watches going to be for?
Myself and my brother.
And who was going to have the 18 karat gold Rolex?
Myself.
And what about the other two Rolexes?
One of them was for my brother, and one of them was just basically I was going to wear that one also. I'm not even sure why I bought that one.
So you had one for you, one for your brother, and a spare. Is that right?
Right.
Okay. And the money clips that you purchased were for the money that you were going to be having. Is that it?
I really don't remember buying money clips, but I'm sure it was just to hold whatever it is that maybe I had. Otherwise, obviously, to hold money and credit cards and so on, since I normally didn't carry a wallet. I normally didn't have to carry much with me, but
Shortly after this, you returned to Princeton for the memorial service. Is that correct?
yes,
And sometime after you were in Princeton, you bought a car, didn't you?
right.
What kind of car did you buy?
I bought a Porsche 911 or Carrera.
All right. And how much money did you spend buying the Porsche?
I don't remember exactly, but it was very expensive.
We have a moment, please, Your Honor.
Yes.
Mr. Menendez, I'm showing you Exhibit 55, which has been marked it appears to be a package of documents relating to the purchase of a Porsche. The first page looks to be a copy of a driver's license from New Jersey, but the picture is obliterated. Does that appear, though, to be your signature on the driver's license on the first page of this exhibit?
Yes,
And that's a New Jersey license, correct?
that's right.
And the documents seem to reflect that this transaction began on September the 6th of 1989. Is that correct?
Overruled.
Is that correct?
I'm sorry, I didn't
So
see.
the date appears to be September the 6th of 89, where this is on page 3 of the package. It's a sales pre-delivery inspection worksheet. And it's got your signature here at the bottom. Isn't that correct?
Right, I don't think I filled that out, but that's my signature.
Okay, so you did fill out your signature, correct?
Right.
And the ultimate purchase price of this vehicle was, it looks like it was approximately $70,484. Is that correct?
I can't see the numbers too well. That's the original price, and there's some more numbers somewhere around there.
And in addition to buying this car, you had it customized. You had some special things that you wanted on the car, right?
Just something to do with the radio, I believe.
Now, September was the 6th. Was that the same day that you got your first payment from the life insurance policy that your Aunt Marta had told you about after the death of your parents? Was that the first
No.
payment? Well, how were you going to pay for the car then?
Well, at the time I bought the car, those payments had already arrived. I don't know what day they arrived, but
So that at the time that you bought the car, you already knew that you had insurance money from your parents' death to pay for the Porsche. Is that correct?
right.
Okay. And you didn't get the bottom of the line Porsche, did you?
No,
Hadn't you always wanted a Porsche?
no, I had never even thought about a Porsche. And I just usually drove my parents' cars, or my dad bought the Alpha for me, or we just drove whatever they had. And I was in New Jersey, and I was gonna buy a new car, so I bought this one, which was on the floor in the building.
So was this another one of those purchases that you just happened to be there and so you just bought it kind of like the Rolex? Or did some more thought go into purchasing this car?
No, I was with the bodyguards who were sort of like the friends. At least one of them was I felt close to, and asking their advice, and we drove the car, and so I bought that one.
Now on Sunday, August the 20th, oh, by the way, I wanted to ask you one more thing. You said that you went out to buy the Rolex because you were cooped up in the hotel. Is that correct? You were cooped up in the hotel?
Right.
Okay, you were cooped up in the Hotel Bel Air, correct?
Right. That's not why we went to buy the Rolex, but we were.
Okay, and could you describe the accommodations that you had at the Hotel Bel Air while you were grieving for your parents?
We got the room that Henry had arranged, and that's where our family met, and that's where I stayed, and my brother stayed.
Okay, was this a one bedroom room, or was it 2 bedrooms, or was it, how big was it?
I don't remember. It was big enough that everybody could sort of meet there, and they would all order food, and we would meet there, and so it was pretty big.
Was it a suite?
Yes.
So you had not only a bedroom, but a living room, is that correct?
Right.
And did you have a hot tub? Jacuzzi?
If we did, we never used it. I don't believe so. There was some kind of a garden thing out back.
Now, on August the 20th, when you called Terry Berman, I believe you've indicated that it was your intent to get out of the house as part of your plan to try to save your life. Is that correct?
On August the what?
August the 20th, the day that your parents died.
Right.
Okay, and it was part of your plan that you wanted to get out of the house in order to avoid being killed by your parents, correct?
Right. As soon as my brother got back, we had the short discussion, and I told him we got to get out of the house.
And when you say your brother got back at around noon, correct?
All right, as I indicated, we'd have to take a break at
Oh, I'm
this.
sorry, Your Honor.
All right, we'll take a recess, ladies and gentlemen, and I have a meeting to attend, so we'll resume at 1:45. Don't discuss this case with anyone. Don't form any final opinions about it, and we'll resume at 1:45. Is there something the council wanted to discuss?
First of all, we're going to put over the 17-page letter discussion tomorrow morning.
All right,
Secondly, we need to talk about the lots of letters. And thirdly, I've cited to council and now I will support.
I didn't hear about the box of letters. What was it?
We still need to discuss the box
Yeah.
of letters. And the other thing, from yesterday, does the court have volume 90 from yesterday available?
Yes.
Okay, at page 14991, starting at line 10.
14991. Okay.
Yes, starting at line 10, in response to a question that I asked, Mr. Menendez talked about the bodyguards. And I believe that subject has not been broached in front of the Eric Menendez jury. But again, today, Mr. Menendez mentioned bodyguards. It was not as lengthy as the reference from yesterday. But I would like to ask him during this portion of my cross-examination about this particular subject matter. I believe Ms. Abramson has objection to that.
He might have mentioned it during his direct examination as well.
He did in front of his own jury.
Only in front of his jury. Okay.
Right. And Your Honor, we would object because none of this information about bodyguards that he hired in New Jersey was brought up in front of our jury. And the reference that he made both yesterday and today was so passing that our jury may simply think he's talking about Bel Air Patrol, which they do know about from the house in Beverly Hills. And on both occasions, his interjection of the word bodyguards was non-responsive to the questions. It was a rambling type of answer.
We've had witnesses do that in this trial.
I don't they all? No,
No, not all.
but a lot do. And it's therefore hard to anticipate. It's hard to object when a word goes by. And so we would object to bringing out the bodyguard information from New Jersey because it isn't in front of our jury. It isn't relevant. My client didn't have such people. And I don't think the door has been opened by those two passing references, which could easily refer to the Bel Air Patrol.
This gets into the extrinsic evidence that has been the subject of some of our discussions that have related to what evidence may be introduced before both juries and what evidence would be introduced only before one jury or the other. We had that discussion to some extent at the sidebar this morning prior to the introduction of evidence relating to the purchase of the Porsche, but the extrinsic evidence in relationship to that is virtually nil in the people's case in chief. The bulk of the evidence really is what the defendant just said on the witness stand. So it's not the same as having a witness come in and extensive evidence, such as the witness, was it Mr. Winkowski, who testified regarding his activities. And although those to some extent related to the purchase of the Porsche, it was just inconsequential aspect of that, in that he happened to be standing by when someone solicited his advice as to color or style or something of that nature, which is really meaningless. But the extent of what the people propose to do here is evidence that has not been heard by the Eric Menendez jury and will be appropriately reserved for the Lyle Menendez jury only.
Okay, now, Your Honor, in that same vein then, the September 17th conversation with Detective Zoller, which has previously only been played for the Lyle Menendez jury, is something I believe the court said we could go into in front of both juries. Is that correct?
Yes, you already have.
Well, I'm going to go into it some more, and in that particular, at page 32 of that, there is some mention about the bodyguards where he says he was being followed. So does the court want me to not ask about that particular portion of the September 17th? Except
Those things that relate to the bodyguards, to the extent that you're going to go into them at this point, can be reserved for the Lyle Menendez jury only, since there was extrinsic evidence. And by extrinsic evidence, I mean independent evidence. A witness testified about those activities, and that was Mr. Winkowski, and it was testimony only heard by the Lyle Menendez jury. So at this point, it wouldn't have any real significance to the Eric Menendez jury to hear this, so the court would sustain the objection.
Along the same lines.
Anything else now before we start out?
I would like to inquire along the same lines what the people's position is on the restaurant purchase information, which I think was also.
In cross-examination, but it was really non-responsive. It had to do with what jobs or what efforts he had made to earn a living after his parents' death, and he volunteered something in relationship to the restaurant. It can be argued whether it was not responsive, but my recollection was the question didn't call for that particular response. There was at some point thereafter an objection which was sustained, and it never went further.
Okay.
All right, anything else before we proceed?
Yeah, the box letters, Ron.
Well, you were going to give me the material to read. You were going to read it. I received it just as we broke.
The transcript?
Yeah. And then the defense was going to review it and present the court with any case law that they had on the subject. I don't know if you've done that or will be doing that, or what is your position?
Well, I haven't had the opportunity to look for the case law yet, but I did review the transcript, not only the portion that was provided, but also the court had made reference to some testimony by Lyle Menendez on direct examination relating to letters or reading letters, things of that nature. So I checked that as well. And it appears, Your Honor, that the only two places where there's any reference in the direct testimony to letters is found at page 14,429. And at that page through 14,431, there's testimony, direct testimony by Lyle Menendez going into the content of a letter which was read to him by Eric Menendez in the fall of 1986. The letter, in brief, was a suicide letter. The prosecution objected to the introduction of the content of that letter. Counsel for Lyle Menendez indicated it was being offered for the state of mind of Mr. Menendez. And the court overruled the objection and admitted the content of the letter for the purpose of showing Lyle Menendez's state of mind. And he then testified to what was read to him by Eric Menendez. Again, at page 14,435, there is testimony that Lyle Menendez at one point read.
Let me stop you for a minute, because if you're not in a position to argue the matter regarding the legal authorities, I don't see why we should be consuming time now on this subject. If you need more time to research the issue, then I'd rather do it all at once rather than bifurcate and waste time that the jury could otherwise be using in the courtroom.
Fine.
All right, are we ready to proceed otherwise?
Yes.
Okay, get both juries in place. The juries are all back, both back in the courtroom. All jurors are back, and welcome again. And we'll now resume with the examination of the witness, further cross-examination.
Mr. Menendez, before the lunch break, I was asking you a question about how it was that you and your brother came up with the address for the gun purchase of August Street. And I believe you indicated that your brother wrote down the month of August because it was the month of August when you purchased the guns. Is that correct?
Right.
On Friday, you were questioned by your attorney in regards to your purchase of the shotguns at the Big Five. And you gave the following testimony. This is volume 88, page 14,592. Starting at line 21. In response to a question by your attorney about did anyone in the store show you how the guns worked, part of your answer was as follows. I was mostly wandering around the store, allowing Eric to complete the purchase. It was a long thing. She had a form with different stuff, and we had found out of a phone book. We felt that maybe we should have a local address, since Donovan's address was San Francisco or something up north. We didn't know if there were going to be further restrictions, like if you had to be in that city. We just didn't know the rules. We kept finding out as we went along. Okay, that was the
Right.
testimony that you gave on Friday as to where you got this address.
Right.
Okay, and today you testified that the address came from the fact that it was the month of August.
Right.
Where did you get the address?
He did it because it was the month of August, because I found out after he had filled out the forms and we had left the store that he had blanked on the address that he had looked up in the phone book, because he said he was concerned that they might ask for a local address when he bought the guns, and he was handling the ID. And so he blanked out and he just wrote the month of August.
Oh, so you had discussed previously the idea of getting a local address. Is that correct?
No, we didn't discuss it, but he was concerned about it, and at some point looked in the phone book. And so I found that out afterwards, because he was telling me he had blanked out and he had just wrote this thing August, and he was telling me what happened, because we weren't expecting a form. And so when the lady brought out the form for him to do all the signing and everything, I just assumed he was going to use the address that was on the license.
Well, if you
And
were,
afterwards he told me he had not. He had just said August.
now, when was it that you looked in the phone book?
I didn't really look in the phone book, but he looked in the phone book probably when we were at the restaurant. But he remembers that a little better. He says we're at the Bob's Big Boy.
Now, if you weren't expecting that there'd be a form to fill out, why did you need to find an address in the city?
I didn't think that we did, but he said that he was concerned that they might ask him for a local address, and so he would have to give one. So he looked one up.
Now, where is Mr. Goudreau's driver's license presently? Do you know?
I really don't know.
After the purchase of the shotguns, do you know what happened to the driver's license? Was it destroyed?
No, I don't know where it is. Somewhere.
I believe right before we broke for lunch, I was asking you a question about the events of August the 20th, and you said that your brother had returned home around noon. Is that correct?
Right.
And prior to your brother returning home, you had already spoken, or you'd already called Perry Berman's. Is that correct?
That's right.
And at that time, you didn't make contact with Mr. Berman, did you?
No, I left a message.
On his answer machine.
Right.
And then I believe you've indicated in your direct examination that you later found out from your father that Perry Berman had returned the message that you'd left.
Right.
And about what time was it that you found out from your father that Perry Berman had returned your call?
That was the problem. I never found out from my dad. He lied to Perry and said that I wasn't there. And I found that out from Perry later. And that's what made me so nervous about the fact that something was going to happen that night. He didn't want me to go out.
All right. And so Perry told you that he had already spoken to your father and that your father said you were out. Is that correct?
Right.
Okay. Did Perry tell you anything more about what your father had said? In other words, did he say he's out for the rest of the day? He's out for 5 minutes. He won't be home till tomorrow. Did he give you any more information than that?
I believe he said that I was at the Beverly Center.
Now, did you get any information from Perry as to what time Perry and your father had this phone call?
I don't remember. I think 1 o'clock, but I think he said around 1 o'clock, but it might be that I just know that now. I don't know.
What time did you actually speak to Perry Berman, person to person, that day? What was the first time you spoke to him?
Sometime in the late afternoon, early evening, between 4 and 6, somewhere in there, I believe.
Now, at that time, I believe you had already made plans. Well, let me ask you this. What did you and Perry discuss?
That I wanted to know if he could do something that night. That's why I had called before and left a message. He said that he was going to dinner with a friend and asked me if I wanted to come along. And then he was going to this wine tasting event afterwards. And I told him that I'd meet him at the wine tasting event because I couldn't go out to dinner until my brother came home. And my brother wasn't there, and my brother and I were going to go to a movie, so we'll just meet afterwards. after the movie, I'd drive over. That's what I told
So
him.
during the phone call you had where you spoke directly to Perry Berman, you told him that you were going to the movies that night, correct?
Yes, I did.
And it was your intention at that time to go to the movies, correct?
Right.
Now, I believe, so you'd already decided you wanted to go to the movies before you talked to Perry between 4 and 6 p.m., correct?
Right.
Now, I believe you indicated before lunch that one of the reasons you wanted to be with Perry is you wanted to be around people.
That's right.
Okay, is that correct?
Yes.
Did you want to be around people you knew or people you didn't know, or did it make a difference?
That really didn't make a difference.
Okay, well, if you wanted to be around people, why didn't you just make arrangements to spend the entire evening with Perry? In other words, find out where he's going to go to dinner, tell him you'll meet him there, and take your brother and go to dinner with him. Why didn't you do that?
Say that again. What did you suggest? That I tell him? Because I had arrangements to go to the movie.
But wouldn't you have felt safer being with Perry the entire evening?
Well, either at the movies or with Perry. But the problem was not that. The problem was that I didn't know where my brother was, and he had not returned. And it was actually many, many hours later that my brother returned. So I couldn't leave.
Skating for over 45 years has taken a toll on my body. I take Cunol turmeric because it helps with healthy joints and inflammation support. Why Cunol? It has superior absorption compared to regular turmeric. Cunol, the brand I trust.
What time was it that your brother left the residence again after he returned at noon?
Right away. We just had a conversation, and then he left.
And at any time, did you go to the Beverly Center that day?
No, I never left the house.
At any time, did your brother indicate to you that he was going to the Beverly Center?
No.
Did he tell you where he was going to go while he was staying away from the house?
No.
All right, so he left again after he came home at noon. He left again at
Right away.
within 15 minutes.
Yeah, something like that.
And did he tell you he'd be in touch with you, or what arrangements did you make to hook up together later?
That we would be going to the movies, and for him to be back certainly before that. So he said he would.
Okay, and what time were you planning to go to the movies?
Whatever the 8 o'clock showing was for Sunday. I knew it at that time. It was either 8:15 or 8 o'clock, something like that.
And it was your intention at that time to go see License to Kill?
No, actually, it was my intention to go see Batman.
But you'd already seen Batman.
Right, but I was supposed to meet a friend there,
Who were you supposed to meet?
a person named Carrie Parker.
Now, when did you make arrangements to go to the movies with Carrie Parker?
Earlier in the week, like either Monday or Tuesday, something in there.
And so you had plans to go to the movies with Carrie Parker to
Right.
see Batman.
Well, he had never seen it, and I had already seen it, and he wanted to see it again. And earlier in the week before this whole thing happened, I told him I'd go with him. So we arranged to meet at the movies that night to go see Batman, and I was willing to see with him again. And so I just kept those plans.
And the fact that your parents were about to kill you didn't cause you to cancel your plans with Carrie Parker. Is that correct?
No, I thought it was the exact opposite. I was glad that we had the plans, and I had told Eric, let's go to the movies with Carrie Parker and be with somebody and be safe.
Now, when you spoke to the police, you told the police that it was your intention to go see License to Kill, but License to Kill was sold out.
Right.
So was that a lie?
That was a lie because I thought that they might talk to Carrie Parker, and then he would say that I didn't show up at the movies. And I was afraid that that was going to happen because I hadn't shown up. So what I did was say that I went to see License to Kill and it was sold out. And I saw Batman and just hope that they hadn't talked to him. And then if I saw Carrie, I was just going to say that I went to see License to Kill and I'd missed him.
So you thought all this out in the period of time after you killed your parents, but before you went and talked to the police. You thought of all the ramifications of what you were going to say. Is that correct?
Well, there weren't many ramifications. We had decided that we were going to say we were at the movies and that I had plans to go to the movies with Carrie. So I thought, well, that's what we would just say, that we went to the movies and hoped that this guy didn't come forward or they didn't find him, because I knew that he would say that I didn't show up.
Now, Carrie Parker was someone that you knew from having gone to physical rehabilitation. Is that correct?
Right.
And he was somebody who was helping you there, correct?
He was a physical therapist there.
And you had known him for how long before the 20th of August?
Well, I went there quite often, and my whole family, I think my whole family went there. So I'm not sure how long. Since I had moved to Beverly Hills, probably.
And when was it that you made the plans with Carrie Parker to go to the movies on the night of August the 20th?
Sometime around either Monday or Tuesday or something of that sort.
And how did you make the plans? Was it in person or over the phone?
Well, I believe I called him. I either called him or we arranged it. I may have had an appointment, but I think I called him
And where did you call him?
at his home.
And where was his home?
I don't know. I just knew the number.
Do you remember what the prefix was, the first three numbers?
I know the number of the center. I don't remember. I believe he lives in Long Beach.
Right. And where did you call him from? Your home in Beverly
I
Hills?
assume my home, yeah.
When you say you assumed your home, was there another location from which you could have called Carrie Parker to make these plans?
It could have been that I didn't even call him and we just arranged it when I was there. I have a memory that I arranged it while I was there by just stopping by, because the place is located on Wilshire, and I stopped by to make that definite arrangement, because he had said when we were in therapy he had never seen Batman and the lines were so long. And I said, well, I'll go see it with you. And if you get there first, just wait in line and I'll meet you in line, or vice versa. And so we had set it up for that Sunday because he only had 2 days off, he said.
And which 2 days did he tell you he had off?
Saturday and Sunday, I believe.
Every week he had Saturday and Sunday off?
I believe, yeah. He had 2 days off. I think it was Saturday and Sunday. And the one day he said he always spent with his girlfriend. And so he could see me the other day. And he didn't want to go out too late because he'd have to be back and work the next morning. He worked all day.
And so if you had called him from the Beverly Hills home, your phone records would reflect a phone call to Long Beach, right?
I guess so, if they reflect that, yeah.
Okay. And if you called him from somewhere else or you went by, then your phone records wouldn't reflect that, correct?
Well, if I stopped by the office, then there'd be no phone records, right?
Right. Okay. Is there any other place you could have called him from, Mr. Menendez?
Yeah, I mean, there's certainly, I could have called him, I guess, from other places, phone booths, or if I was driving my parents' car from the phone in the car. Again, I think I stopped by.
And when was the last time, so would it be your testimony that the last time you had seen Carrie Parker prior to your parents' deaths would have been the Monday or the Tuesday? So that would have been the 13th or the 14th of August. Is that correct?
That's when I believe that I either stopped by or called him. And I'm not sure when my appointment was with him, but I had a shoulder problem. And so I was going in to see him pretty often. I mean, he wasn't really a friend of mine. He was a therapist. And this was the first time we were ever going to get together outside of the clinic. But we liked each other. And so we arranged it.
Now, when you made the phone call to Perry Berman the night that your parents died at 11:07 p.m., you used a U.S. Sprint card, correct?
I may have, yes.
And the U.S. Sprint card, you've seen the records in this case of the phone calls from the Santa Monica Civic on the U.S. Sprint card at 11:07 and 11:15 p.m.?
I probably have seen the records.
May I have a moment, please, Charlie? Mr. Menendez, I'm showing you an exhibit which is marked as 19. It's phone records, U.S. Sprint phone records. And there's been an agreement that these are from your father's U.S. Sprint phone card. Now, it indicates here that on the 20th of August of 1989, at 11:07 and 11:15 p.m., there were 2 phone calls made from the Santa Monica Civic to area code 213-657-8190. Now, that phone number was Perry Berman's phone number, correct?
Right.
And these 2 transactions reflect a 6-minute and a 1-minute phone call, which you made from the Santa Monica Civic to Perry Berman, correct?
Right.
Now, was there any reason you felt it necessary to use the Sprint card to make this phone call?
That was just what I had done basically all my life is we used the 800 numbers, either the dad's, I don't know if that's dad's company's number or my mom's. I think it's my father's credit card that my whole family used. I certainly used it all the time because I was traveling and in different places. So I was always using the Sprint card.
Well, was the phone call from Santa Monica to West Hollywood an expensive phone call?
No, but I just always used the Sprint card.
Was there any reason that you wanted to keep records of that phone call? In other words, did you want to have a permanent record of that phone call on the U.S. Sprint records to show that you'd made the call?
No,
So that wasn't anything you thought out in advance?
no.
I believe you indicated then you talked to Perry Berman between 4 and 6 p.m. and you indicated to him that you would meet him at the Taste of LA Festival, whatever it was, at the Santa Monica Civic at the conclusion of the movie. Is that correct?
Right.
And at that time, did you know what time the movie would get out?
No.
Okay, but you knew at that time that the movie would start at either 8 or 8:15, correct?
Something like that, yeah.
And you knew at that time that most movies run approximately 2 hours, correct?
Yes.
All right, so that if the movie got out between 10 and 10:15, what was your state of mind as to when you were going to see Perry Berman at the Taste of LA? Let's say the movie got out at 10 and you had to travel from Century City to Santa Monica,
Right.
okay? What was your state of mind as to when you were going to actually get to Santa Monica and meet up with Perry Berman?
Didn't have any specific time. I mean, that really wasn't important. That was just something I did because, the important thing was to try and get tickets at that point. That's why we went to the theater. So it wasn't like we have to meet Perry by this time. He never said a specific time he would be there. I was hoping it ran late, and I just missed him.
But Mr. Menendez, when you made the plans to meet Perry Berman that afternoon, you've told these juries that you didn't know then that you were going to have to kill your parents that night,
Right.
right?
Right.
Okay. So at the time, if what you're telling us is correct, at the time that you talked to Perry Berman, you had fully intended to go to the movies for 2 hours, drive to Santa Monica, and meet up with Perry Berman, correct?
Right.
All right. So leaving aside what happened after the murders, beforehand, you indicated that it was your state of mind that you were going to do these 2 functions that night, correct?
That's right. And that's what I told Perry, that we would be at the movies. And as soon as the movie was over, I would drive over and meet him at the Taste of LA. He said, fine.
All right. And you didn't indicate it to him what time you'd be there. Is that correct?
No, whatever time it took to get to the movie to the Taste of LA.
Now, so you've now told us that you also had plans to meet with Carrie Parker that night. Is that correct?
Right.
That's something that you didn't mention in your direct testimony, correct?
No, I didn't mention that. I did. I think that I had mentioned that I told my mother that I was late and was supposed to meet a friend at the movies.
All right. But you never mentioned the name of Carrie Parker until this afternoon, correct?
Right.
All right. And so it's your testimony here today that approximately 6 to 7 days before the 20th of August, you had already made plans to meet Carrie Parker at the movies that night,
Right.
and that you had no other contact with Carrie Parker during the week to finalize or whatever these arrangements. In other words, what did you tell Carrie when you made these plans?
That was his day off, he told me, because the other day he spent with his girlfriend. He wanted to see Batman. And so one of us figured out the time that it was playing, and we arranged to meet at that time. And that's what we did before this all even happened.
Okay, and the reason you told the police you went to License to Kill is what? So that later on you could say, I'm not understanding. Why is it you told the police you wanted to see License to Kill, but you intended to see Batman?
Well, I just wasn't sure what was going to happen with Carrie. And I told the police that we went to see License to Kill because when we got there, we knew that it was sold out because that's what the lady said. And so we would say that it was sold out and we went to see Batman. And I didn't really put a whole lot of thought into it other than that would be what we would say. And then if I had talked to Carrie, I would say that I went to see the other movie.
Right, after you made your arrangements with Perry Berman, let's say those arrangements occurred at 6 p.m.
Right.
What did you do next?
I just waited for my brother.
And about what time was it that your brother came home?
I don't remember exactly, but I think around 9:45, 9, somewhere in there, very late, close to 10 o'clock.
But you and your brother had plans to go to the movies.
Right. And we were missing the plans because he was so late. But I felt I couldn't leave.
All right, and so what time was it then that your mother said you couldn't go to the movies? When was it your mom said you can't go to the movies? Was that before your brother got home or after?
That was in the argument we had right before this all happened.
Yes, was that before or after your brother got home?
It was after my brother got home, and I had the conversation with him, tell him what happened during the day and that my dad had lied to Perry. And I was sort of frantic to get out of the house, told him we got to get out of the house, and was upset that he was so late. And I went to tell my mother that we were leaving, that I had to meet a friend at the movies and that we were late. And that's when she told me that we couldn't go out. And I asked her why, and she started stammering. And my dad came in and we had this huge fight.
Now, what time was it that you had the discussion with your father where you went into the den and he said something about tennis camp not mattering? Could you tell us about that again, please?
That was sometime in the afternoon, and I had first time I decided to go over to the house, and I had gone in and I had said hello and they hadn't answered me, and I went into the kitchen, and when I decided to make another attempt and sit down and watch the tennis, and at some point I wanted to get some reaction out of my dad because it was making me so nervous that they weren't speaking to me. So I just asked this question that I knew we had talked about before about the unarmed arbitrage camp. I asked him if I could get the number.
Now, I believe you testified earlier that Perry Berman led you to believe that he had called back your house around 1 o'clock in the afternoon, and at that time your father had said you weren't home, correct?
Right.
Okay. Did you go into the house and talk to your father after 1 o'clock?
Yes.
All right. So you hadn't seen your father all day up until you went in there. Is that correct?
That's right.
And you hadn't made your presence known in any other way by calling the house or anything else. Is that correct?
That's right.
All right. So then you indicated that when Perry told you that your father said you weren't home, that scared you.
That's right.
Okay. But how did your father know you were home if you hadn't seen him all morning?
Well, I guess he couldn't be sure, but he certainly knew I wasn't at the Beverly Center. Why would he say that? I mean, I didn't think about that. I just assumed if I got a call from Perry, he would have come out and see if I was in the guest house, which was normally where I would be. And I say, Perry's on the line. He'd like to talk to you.
Well, but your brother was gone, right? And do you know what your brother told your parents in regards to why he was leaving the house?
No, but he didn't leave with me.
But your brother, you don't know whether or not your brother told your father that he was going to the Beverly Center.
No,
right?
I don't know that.
All right. So why was it so alarming to you that your father had said you weren't home when there was no way for your father to know that you were in the guest house hiding?
There was a way. He could have walked over like I would have expected and said, your friend Perry is on the line. Would you like to talk to him? Or something, or my mother could have came over.
But wasn't it just as reasonable to assume that you were off with your brother Eric, as you often were?
Well, when Perry said that, I just didn't see it as reasonable. It freaked me out very badly, actually. I was sure that my dad had lied on purpose and excuse to Perry that we were off somewhere, or I was off somewhere, and hoping, I guess, that Perry wasn't going to call back.
Well, it wasn't like he told Perry that you were out of the country or out of town, or, I mean, he didn't say he's out of the country and won't be back for 6 months.
No, because Perry had said he was returning my call.
Right.
So obviously I was there.
And it wasn't like you were out of town, that you just left for San Diego for the weekend. Your father didn't tell Perry anything like that.
Right,
according to
because he
you.
was returning my call, and my father would have known that's why he was calling. I'm returning Lyle's call, I assume, and to say that he's out at the Beverly Center without checking and so on, I didn't see it as reasonable. For me, it was panic.
It was very ominous.
Yes.
And you never considered that was just a mistake your father had made.
No.
So then you said between 6 and 9:45, you simply waited for your brother to come home. Is that correct?
That's right.
And what were you doing? Where were you, first of all, during that period of time?
In my house.
And what were you doing?
Just waiting.
Where was the gun?
The gun was in my room,
In your bedroom.
in my closet.
Now, I believe you indicated when you slept, you kept it next to your bed. Is that correct?
I kept it in my bed. Yes.
And then during the day, you moved it to another location?
Well, I hid it in the closet just because I felt like if I wasn't in the house with the gun at night, I shouldn't, obviously I was going to hide it in the closet. Nobody ever really went over there. My mother didn't go in there, and neither did the maid wasn't there that whole weekend, so that wouldn't matter. But nobody ever went in the guest house, but I put it in the closet anyway, just in case.
And you knew the maid wasn't there that weekend because she was never there on the weekends, right?
Right.
And this, the killing of your parents occurred at a time when the maid wasn't home, correct?
Right.
And you knew that the maid was not going to be home that night, correct?
Well, the maid was not there on the weekends.
You knew she didn't come back till Monday morning.
Probably come back Monday morning.
Now, in this discussion, when you went back into the house and your parents were in the den and your father wouldn't talk to you, you said you tried to get them to talk to you about the camp, correct? The tennis camp?
Right.
And then what was the reply of your parents?
Well, I was talking to my dad. I asked him if I could get the number of the unknown arbitrage camp, and he said, "What does it matter anymore?" In a sarcastic way. And that's when I didn't talk to him again.
Did you find that comment, "What does it matter anymore," to be a threat on your life?
I did, and also not answering me when I came in, and then that comment to me was just his way of saying that, you're going to die. What does it matter? You're not going to be here. He had already, it was like we were ghosts already. It made me feel very, very panicked. You have to understand, at this point in the weekend, I was already shaken and thinking that this was going to happen. My mother had just made the comment the night before. I had just found out in the morning what had happened to my brother that night. I was very unstable, and comments like that really affected me.
Okay, so when your father made this comment to you about what does it matter anymore, you felt that death was imminent. Is that correct?
No, I just felt that was a sarcastic way of him saying that I was going to die.
And what was he doing when he said this to you? Was he sharpening a knife or anything like that? What was he doing?
He was just looking at me, and he had been watching tennis.
He was watching tennis on TV. Is that correct?
Right.
Okay. So then you felt that this was another sign that your parents were going to kill you. Is that correct?
Yes.
And did your mother join in and say, yes, that's correct? What does it matter anymore? Did she do anything to affirm that comment of your father?
No, she didn't answer me when I came in, and she didn't say anything the whole time I was there that I remember.
Okay. But you decided then that this had added to your sense of foreboding. Is that correct?
It did, yes.
So you got in your car and you went out and waited for your brother so he wouldn't come into the house where he might be killed, right?
No.
Why didn't you do something like that, Mr. Menendez?
No, I went back to my guest house and waited, and I knew my brother was going to be coming home that night.
And you and your brother had plans to go to the movies at 8 o'clock with your friend Carrie Parker, correct?
Right.
But he came home much later, is that correct?
Yes, he did.
And when he came home, did he explain to you why he was so late?
Well, we didn't waste time on that. I just told him what had happened, mostly with the phone call with Perry and the comment my dad had made, and that we had to get out of the house because I was sure that something was going to happen that night. At least I was thinking that something was going to happen that night.
And so you discussed with your brother the plan that you wanted to get out of the house, correct?
Yeah, it wasn't a plan. He came and we had this very fast discussion. It was basically me talking and said, we got to get out of the house.
So you went and got in your car and you left.
Well, I wasn't able to do that. I went and I talked to my mother and told her we were leaving. And that's when she said that we couldn't go out.
Well, that when she said you couldn't go out, that added to your fear, right?
Well, not until I asked her why and she didn't have an answer. Then that added to my fear greatly, yes.
So you turned around and went out the door and got in your car and drove away.
No, I didn't get to do that either because my dad came in, heard the argument, and came in and basically became a huge fight in which he was ordering my brother upstairs and I was saying, you're not going to touch my brother. And he was responding. And there were other things said that I don't remember so well, but it turned into this big fight. So I never got to the car to go out to the movies.
But you did have the opportunity to go out and get your gun.
Well, once I believed that they were going to kill us when my dad closed the door, then I ran upstairs and then decided to get my gun.
So the closing of the doors was the last straw, correct?
The closing of the doors to me, it was the last thing that I remember that caused me to just totally freeze and panic and realize that it was happening. But it was a series of things. It really wasn't just one comment or one incident. It was a series of things after 3 days of just being shaken and wondering when it's going to happen and ominous comments. And at that point, I just was sure that was it. And we had been wondering when it was going to happen. And I was sure that was it. And I ran upstairs and my brother felt the same way. And I ran to get my gun.
This is what really happened, Mr. Menendez?
That's what really happened.
All right, so then you went back to the guest house to get your weapon, is that correct?
Yes.
And at the time, there was a phone in your house, correct?
Yes.
And you knew how to dial 911, right?
Yes.
But you didn't,
No.
even though you were now sure that you were going to die.
Right. All I was thinking was to just run as fast as I could and give me the best chance.
Well, why didn't you just run out the back gate?
Well, for one thing, my brother was in the house and I wasn't going to leave him. And I just didn't think of that. I thought my best chance was
To kill your parents.
to get my gun and go to where they were.
May I approach, please, Your Honor?
One of my favorite supplements is Cunol turmeric. Turmeric helps with healthy joints and inflammation support, and Cunol has the #1 doctor recommended form of turmeric. Cunol, the brand I trust.
Now, Mr. Menendez, this exhibit appears to show the entry of your house. This is the first floor of the home that you lived in at the time that you chose here, correct?
Right.
And I believe you testified on your direct examination that you went into the guest house and then you went somewhere else in the house. Could you tell me where it was you went after you went to the house, the guest house, which is in the back of this diagram? Okay.
Right.
You came up from the guest house and where did you go?
Around the side of the house to the outside.
When you say the side of the house, are you talking about towards the living room here,
No. My guest house is over here,
right?
right back here.
Okay.
A little pool here and a very small grassy area. And I ran around the side. And there's a little grassy section that goes around the side of the outside of the house.
Past the living room,
Right.
okay, and towards the front of the house.
It goes right into the sally port, yes.
All right, and then you went towards the front of the house where the cars were normally parked, is that correct?
Where my brother's car was with the ammunition, yes.
Okay, now I think you testified already that the gun was loaded.
Right.
Okay, and you had loaded it when you got in the car on the way home from San Diego, right?
Right.
All right, so why did you go get ammunition if the gun was loaded?
Well, I wanted to put in the ammunition that the guy had recommended. That I had never done that. And so I ran to the car and my brother was there and we reloaded.
Okay, now, you already had a loaded gun,
Right.
okay, and there was ammunition in the gun.
Yeah, there was, but I wanted to, it was just in my mind that I had to get the kind, that I had not reloaded the gun, even though we had bought the ammunition that the guy said we were supposed to use. And so I had to change it.
Oh, so you were gonna change the ammunition.
Yes, I did.
All right, well, when was it you found out that you didn't have the right ammunition in your gun? Was it after you bought the gun?
No, at some point after I bought the gun, I had that concern that it was maybe not the right ammunition.
So you went to a gun shop and you made inquiries, correct?
Right.
And you found out what?
He basically just, after a long explanation about ammunition and guns, told us this is what you should use. And that's what I bought.
So you bought a second box of ammunition?
Right. And I
And-
believe it's different than what we bought originally.
And what day was it that you bought the second box of ammunition?
Saturday, like around the middle of the day, right before we left on the fishing trip.
And you were concerned that you'd have to use this gun for self-defense, correct?
Right.
So when you got home from getting the second type of ammunition on Saturday, you immediately changed the ammunition of the gun, right?
No, because buying the ammunition was just basically my concern about the ammunition, but also to waste time so I could arrive late and hopefully miss the fishing trip. That's what was on my mind, was the fishing trip and the problem with that. And when we got home, we immediately rushed, went on the fishing trip, and I'd never really, I probably had an opportunity, but I had never thought about it and just hadn't changed it.
Okay, so you bought the ammunition because you wanted better ammunition, but you bought the ammunition because you wanted to be late.
Right, both reasons.
Okay, so you're saying now you didn't have time to change the ammunition before you went on the trip, right?
Right.
Okay, so when you came home,
Well, yeah, before I went on the trip, right.
So-
I really wasn't thinking about it. Buying the ammunition, I knew that I couldn't have shotguns on the boat. And so buying ammunition is one of the things that I had thought about Friday night, that I had better check and see if it's the right ammunition and so on. But mainly I was trying to figure out how we could miss the trip and in a non-suspicious way. So driving around and, the ammunition store is one of the places we went.
when you came home and you saw that your parents' cars were still in the driveway and you
Right.
wanted to miss the trip, why didn't you just turn around and go down the block?
Well, I don't know. I saw the cars and I was surprised that they were still there and they hadn't left. And I was sort of hoping for that. And I pulled in, and again, I did not want to. I could have just not shown up at all, but I didn't want to bring it to a head where my dad knew that I was basically going to disregard his insistence to go on the trip and make him nervous to the point of definitely thinking I'm going to run to the police and doing something immediately. And we weren't positive about the trip. So we felt there was nothing we could do. We would just wait and see. And I really just got caught up in going on the trip and sort of, I just didn't think clearly.
If you wanted to miss the trip, all you had to do is just not come home.
Yes, but then, that would have brought things to a head. You couldn't just tell my dad no like that. And so I didn't want him to get nervous and think, oh, these, that Lyle and Erica are doing things together, that something strange is going on. They're not going on the trip, and we would have had this big argument. And then, they would have thought we were going to go straight to the police or let them know what was going on. And I thought that would make it more dangerous than it already was.
Then why were you trying to miss the trip?
I was hoping to miss the trip in a way that could be explained, like we were just late and they would just leave.
Well, why didn't you just do that?
I tried. We showed up about an hour late or so, and they had just postponed it. They just waited, and we were late to the fishing thing.
But if your parents hadn't postponed it, then your father would have thought that you and your brother were out telling people that he was a child molester, and it would have brought things to a head. So I don't understand. What if you were either going to be late or you weren't going to be late?
Right.
Right.
I was hoping to be late enough that they would just go. And I would have felt much more relieved if we would have got home an hour or so late and they would have already left. Then I would have known the fishing trip had nothing to do with arranging to kill us. But they waited, and that made me even more nervous. But I didn't feel there was anything I could do about it. I wasn't willing to have this major fight and not go and bring everything to a head and make my dad even more nervous, because I had not spoken to him about this since Thursday, and we had left the situation very bad, and I didn't want to make it worse.
And you found it nerve-wracking that your family waited for you to get home before they went on a family outing? That was something very peculiar?
Well, this trip, we had expressed, and either my mom or I guess my mom, that we really didn't want to go on the trip. And I don't think we were even expected to go on the trip originally. It just wasn't the type of thing that my dad would allow me to waste so many hours in the middle of the day on a boat trip instead of playing tennis. And it wasn't until Friday night that suddenly there was an insistence that we go. And to me, that was a big deal. And my mom was delivering the message. So, if they would have just gone, I would have felt better. But them waiting an hour, postponing the trip when this trip was supposed to be for my dad, not for us, was to me a big deal.
So when you decided it was time that your parents were going to kill you because they closed the doors, you had time to change ammunition, right?
It wasn't that I had time. It was one of the things I did in rushing to get into the house.
And during that period of time, did it occur to you that rather than burst in on your parents and shoot them to death, you could go to the police, you could leave home, you could do something other than what you were about to do?
It didn't occur to me.
But
We had already talked about all those things, and we had not done those things. And when this happened, and I was sure that this was it, all I was thinking about was how fast I could get into the house.
While still stopping to change the ammunition.
Yes.
Did you practice changing the ammunition before you did it that night?
Only putting the other shells in and figuring out how the gun worked originally.
So then you popped all the shells out, right?
Right,
You put all the new shells in, right?
right.
How many shells did you put in the shotgun, Mr. Menendez?
I'm not sure. Maybe all the way. I had a bunch of shells, and I was trying to sort out, take only the ones that were the new ones, which were a different color. And so I was grabbing the new ones and putting them in. And I grabbed a bunch, and I was putting them in sort of as I was moving. And I put some in my pocket and just ran in. Followed my brother.
All right, now, did you run it through the front door?
No.
Did you run it through the den?
Right,
Okay, on what, a French door that leads out into the front of the house?
right. It's like I don't know what French door is exactly, but there's a couple window doors, and that one was already open because my brother had gone through there to get out, I guess.
Skating for over 45 years has taken a toll on my body. I take Cunol turmeric because it helps with healthy joints and inflammation support. Why Cunol? It has superior absorption compared to regular turmeric. Cunol, the brand I trust.
All right, so you and your brother went in through this door, which I take it normally your mother kept locked, right?
I'm not really sure. I mean, all the doors were locked that one night, but normally the house was not locked.
Right, and so, all the doors were locked that night. Is that correct?
Right.
Okay, you told the police the doors were unlocked. You
No,
talked to them.
when I say that night, I meant when we had the argument on Saturday, and she had locked the house, and I had gone around, like I said, and checked all the doors, and they were locked.
All right, so you and your brother went in through the den, you went down the hallway, is that correct?
Right.
And then you went to the closed doors of the family room, is that correct?
Right, we just pushed those doors open.
You burst through the doors.
Right.
Was burst the right word? Did you burst through the doors?
That's just the right word.
All right, and in this room, there was a television set here on the wall that says storage. Is that correct, where the TV set was?
Right.
Now, in addition to having this set of French doors into the family room, there are or glass doors that go out onto this patio, correct?
Right,
And there's also a door from the kitchen into the family room.
right.
Now, I take it before you and your brother burst in to kill your parents, you looked through these doors to see what they were doing.
No, we weren't even sure they were going to necessarily be in that room, but I was hoping. We just burst through the doors, and that's when I saw the shadows of people to the right, and I knew they were in the room.
Did you ever think to go into the kitchen and look through the door from the kitchen into that room?
We didn't think we had time to be waiting and looking and stuff. I was just running as fast as I could, and so was my brother, and he got there first, and we just went right to the doors. And as soon as I saw something, I started firing. There was no time to just be watching and trying to see where they were exactly and so on.
Now, your brother went into the room before you, is that correct?
Right.
Who fired first, your brother or you?
I really don't know. I fired right away.
As soon as you got through the door, you started firing?
Right.
Okay. And you have no idea what your parents were doing right before you started firing, is that correct?
I don't have any idea. I thought they were in the process of looking for us.
Well, if they were in the process of looking for you, why would they be locked up in the den?
I didn't know where they were. All I knew was they had been waiting for my brother to get home also. My brother was now home. We were not supposed to leave. And that my brother was supposedly, my dad was probably thinking, waiting upstairs, and he had closed the doors, and they were now going to do it. And that was all that I was thinking. And I was going to burst through the doors and start firing.
With guns blazing, right?
Right.
Now, you've had an opportunity to look at the crime scene photographs, haven't you?
No. Except when they were here.
Well, yes, in court. Have you had an opportunity to look at them in court?
I looked at some of them, yes.
You're aware of the fact that there were 2 misses through the French doors that lead out into the backyard, correct?
Objection, Your Honor, misstates the testimony.
There may have been.
All the other shots hit the targets, didn't they?
I have no idea. The room was dark. As soon as you fired, there was smoke. And we were firing. I remember glass shattering, and I remember that there were huge noises that seemed all around me, and I was just firing as many times as I could.
Did you listen to the coroner testify about the wounds that your parents had?
Yes.
Now, do you remember that your father had a wound to his left leg? Do you remember that wound above his knee?
I don't remember that wound.
Okay.
But
The coroner testified that the wound occurred from the inside of the thigh to the outside of the thigh, correct?
I think I remember that, yes.
Now, when you were firing, it's your testimony that you were firing from the direction of the door, is that correct?
I was firing in the direction of whoever was right there, which was my dad.
Okay, so you came in through the French doors and you just started to fire, is that correct?
When I saw something move toward me, I fired at it.
And when the thing moved towards you, it wasn't armed with any kind of weapon, was it?
Well, it was my dad, and I didn't know that. I thought that they were armed.
With what?
Guns.
From where?
I thought they were in the process of killing us. I thought that they had guns. We assumed they had planned this in advance.
Now, this is Exhibit 20. And this is a larger picture of the room in which your parents were killed, correct?
Right.
And you see there's a table, there's a sectional couch, a coffee table, and the place where the television is, correct?
Right.
Right. So you came in through the French doors preceded by your brother, right?
My brother in front of me. Right.
Okay. And your father was off to your right, and it's your
Right.
testimony that he was rising. He was
I
standing
don't know
up.
if he was. No, I just saw. I couldn't see his body that well. All I could see was that there was somebody there, and that was coming forward.
Now, right before you came into this room, had you been in darkness? In other words, had you been you've been outdoors, right, loading the gun?
Right.
And it was dark outside.
Yes.
Okay, and when you came in through the house, was the house dark?
No, the foyer was lit.
All right, and then when you came into this room, it was dark again?
Right.
But the television set was on, wasn't it?
I saw later that it was on, yes.
All right, and there was light coming from the television set when you went into the room.
Yes, there was.
Were there lights on in the kitchen at that time?
I don't remember.
All right, and it's your
May have
testimony
been.
now today that when you got into the room, you couldn't see very well. Is that correct?
Right, you couldn't see very well at all.
Now, you started shooting at your father. By the way, did anyone make any noise? Did your parents make any noise as they were being killed?
Like, they may have. I didn't hear any noise. All I could hear was the booming noises from the guns.
Now, the wound to your father's leg, which starts on the inside of his thigh and goes to the outside, how did he get that?
I have no idea.
Well, if he was on the sofa, someone would have had to be either behind the sofa or over in this area in order to have inflicted the wound on his thigh.
Objection argumentative.
Would they have?
Well, I don't think he was on the sofa. I think he was standing right around, like in front of that coffee table, which I don't remember being in the position that it is there. It was straight, and he was standing in front of it, like on this side of it.
All right, and do you remember where on his body you shot him the first time you shot him?
No,
Do you know where your mother was when you started shooting your father?
somewhere to his right.
Could you see her when you started shooting your father?
I could see someone over to the right, yes.
Where was your brother when you started shooting your father?
He was somewhere in that part of the room. He had run into that part of the room.
When you say in that part of the room, near the coffee table?
Like in front of the television set. I don't know. He was off to my left.
Was
I
he-
wasn't thinking about my brother. I was just thinking about firing.
Excuse me, Your Honor, can I ask if this drawing is supposed to be to scale or not?
Well, is this an exhibit?
Yes, it's an exhibit.
What exhibit number is it?
It's 20.
All right. All right, well, we'll deal with that later.
Right, are we going to take an afternoon break, Your Honor?
Yes, you tell me, as well as all other participants in the trial, and we'll resume with the cross-examination.
Thank you. Leaving what we were talking about before the break, Mr. Menendez, for a while, when you spoke with Kerry Parker about going to the movies on August the 20th, what did you and he agree to?
I didn't speak to him on the 20th. I spoke to him like a week before.
Yes, the week before the 20th, when you spoke to him, what did you and he agree to? What was your understanding of how and
That we
when?
would see that showing of Batman.
Did you check the newspaper listings to see if it was showing at a particular time in a particular theater?
I believe so. One of us did. He just knew that he didn't want to go to the really late showing because he said he had to get up early for work. And he works like 10 hours a day. And so he thought that would be fine. That would be good. And he'd just meet me there.
And so you had no agreement that you would finalize your plans later on in the week, is that correct?
No.
So when you left or finished your phone conversation with Mr. Parker, it was your impression that you need do nothing further in order to see him on Sunday night at the 8 o'clock showing of Batman at the Century 14 Theaters, correct?
Right.
Right. Now, after you finished killing your parents, I believe you testified on direct that you threw down your guns.
Right.
Okay. And where did you throw the guns?
Well, I don't remember the whole thing very well, but I do remember dropping my gun, I believe, and walking into the foyer.
So did you drop your gun in the room in which you killed your parents?
Yes.
Okay. And you walked into the foyer, correct?
Right.
Was your brother already there or did he follow you?
I don't remember my brother being there until I was against the wall and looked over and saw him.
And when you looked over and saw him, did you and he have any kind of discussion at that time?
Not at that time.
Okay. What happened then?
Well, I wanted to talk to him. I was too exhausted, and I believe I just closed my eyes and stayed against the wall. And at some point, like, I was able to get up, and we did talk
Where did you talk?
in
Where-
the foyer, I believe.
And what did you talk about?
The fact that the police had not come and what we wanted to do about that.
How much time had elapsed from the time that the last shot was fired and the time that you and your brother commented that the police had not come?
I couldn't tell you exactly.
Well, could you give me an approximation?
Between 5 and 10 minutes, I guess.
During that discussion with your brother about the fact that the police hadn't come, did you discuss calling the police yourself?
Well, that's what we were discussing. We discussed not doing that.
Did you discuss the possibility of doing it and then reject the idea? Or did you just start off, we're not calling the police? How did that go?
I don't remember very well, but I believe it was the basic thing was that the amazement that the police had not shown up, and what we wanted to do about that, and basically not sure if we could think of anything that we wouldn't have get caught eventually anyway when they did show up eventually, when somebody had to call 911 and report it to them. So we didn't really think about it there. We just decided that we were going to try and avoid being arrested and questioned. So we left.
All right. Now, how long did this talk with your brother in the foyer take?
Not very long, because I remember talking to him and then thinking to myself, at that point when we decided that we were going to try and avoid them knowing it was us, that they might still show up somehow. Maybe they were just, I just had this sense that now that we had made this decision, now they might show up. And so I wanted to get out of the house fast. And at some point I had, reached the idea that I wanted to pick up the shells, or one of us did. I really don't know who it was. And so we decided to do that first. But I was very concerned about getting out of the house, so we didn't stay there to decide what we were going to tell them and all that. We just wanted to leave first. So after we picked up the shells, we got in the car, and then that's when we started discussing that we would say we were at the movies.
So when you made the decision to pick up the shells, was that something you discussed with your brother, or something that a decision you made on your own?
I really don't remember.
But it was your state of mind at the time that you needed to pick up the shells because of fingerprints.
Right.
And before you loaded the gun and went in the house, did you think about the fingerprints? Or was it after you killed your parents that the idea of,
No, it was, sorry.
after you killed your parents that the idea came to you?
Right.
It was afterwards.
It was after.
Okay. And you were very upset at that time, correct?
No, I was feeling numb and exhausted and very, very just in shock of what had happened. And I mean, it's hard to describe what I was feeling because I was sort of numb. But certainly at that point, this new thing that something bad was going to happen with the police and to get out of there.
Would you say that you were thinking clearly during the time that you made the decision to pick up the shotgun shells?
No, definitely not.
Were you confused?
Yes.
Were you frightened?
Yes.
And yet you still had the presence of mind, did you not, to think about fingerprints?
The thought came to me about fingerprints, and so I picked up the shells.
How many shells did you pick up?
Well, we ended up picking up all of them, but I really didn't know at the time. We
Well-
just were sort of, I don't remember that well. And I do remember being very surprised that we had picked up all of them, because there was no attempt that I remember to search carefully or anything of that sort, just the ones that were in plain view. And
What lighting did you use to pick up the shotgun shells?
we turned on the lights.
Were you at all concerned that by turning on the lights, you might observe anybody, you might cause someone to notice that a light had gone on in the house after all these loud noises had gone on?
Well, we weren't thinking. I didn't think that at all. No.
You weren't thinking.
No.
But you were thinking about fingerprints which could incriminate you and cause you to be arrested, right?
Right.
And you were thinking very clearly that you did not want to be arrested, correct?
Yeah, not clearly, but that I did not want to have to explain what happened, and I did not want to be arrested. And a lot of the things, the decisions don't make sense, but I just wasn't thinking clearly.
But you were thinking clearly about the fingerprints, right?
Not really, but it was a thought that I had. Just came to me, fingerprints, since I just had never, it had not come, I had no thought before all this happened about somebody finding out and so on. It just wasn't in my mind. And so suddenly I was having to think about the police and whether they could figure out that we were involved. And then that's when these things started coming to me about fingerprints and having to say that we were someplace and getting rid of the guns and things like that.
Did you go over to either one of your parents when you went to recover the shells and check to see if they still had a pulse?
No.
Were you fairly confident that they were both dead?
Yes.
And you knew that because you'd inflicted a contact wound to the back of your father's head, correct?
I really wasn't thinking about that at the time. I just knew that they were dead.
You were sure of that, is that correct?
Yes.
Now, when you went to pick up the shells, did your brother help you?
Yes.
And did any of the shells have blood on them or any kind of tissue on them that you can recall?
I don't remember.
Did you have to go into the area where your parents were found? That is, between the coffee table and the sofa. Did you have to go into there to get any of the shells?
I don't believe that I did. Again, I just remember picking up the ones that were in plain view. But maybe my brother did, but I don't have any memory of it.
When you say in plain view, in what areas were the shotgun shells in plain view?
I really don't have any memory of picking them up, actually picking them up, but I do remember being surprised that we got them all and remembering that I hadn't done any search or anything, that I had just had this idea to pick up the shells, and I really didn't even know if it was an idea that made any sense at all, but it just seemed like the thing that I should do, and so I picked up the shells. And I remember not searching, not taking the time because of this concern that the police might come, so we left. And I found out later that we did pick up all the shells.
Did you go behind the sofa, between the sofa and the French doors, to retrieve any of the shells?
I didn't. No.
Did you see your brother go into that area at the time that you were recovering the shells?
I don't have any memory of picking up the shells, only that I did not go into little areas searching, just that things were in plain view.
And you didn't go up and touch either of your parents in your attempts to get the shotgun shells, is that correct?
No.
Okay. How long did it take you to enter the room, pick up the shells, and then leave the room?
I'm not sure, very quickly, maybe a minute.
And where did you put the shells once you had recovered them?
Well, I really don't remember, but I assume I put them in my pockets or carried them with the guns and went to the car.
When you left the room, you got the guns, is that correct?
Right.
Did you get 2 guns or 1 gun?
I don't remember. We ended up taking both of them, but I don't know if I picked up both guns or none, and Eric did. I don't remember.
Okay. And then you left that room, is that correct?
Yes.
Where did you go next?
Well, we went out front to the car and immediately left.
Now, you had blood on you, didn't you?
I may have. I'm sure I did.
You took a shower, didn't you?
No.
You went into the guest house afterwards and you took a shower.
No. I left immediately because I thought the police may still show up. I certainly was not going to wait around and take a shower. I left and tried to make it in time to the theaters and the guns, and still an idea to meet Perry at some point. So, I mean, it wasn't that I was going to hang out in the house. I just felt like the police might come and we should get out of there and then think about what we were going to say and do.
Do you know who Marzi Eisenberg is?
Yes, she's my She was one of my dad's secretaries.
Did you speak to Miss Eisenberg shortly after you killed your parents?
I'm
Like the
Sure, I
Monday?
did at the company functions, the day of the memorial service.
Did you talk to Miss Eisenberg on the telephone, either the Monday or the Tuesday after your parents were killed?
I don't remember that, but it's possible.
Did you tell Miss Eisenberg that at the time your parents were killed, you were in the shower in the guest house?
I really doubt that I would have told her something that different from what I told the police. No way.
So you're
I
saying-
wouldn't have told her that.
So you're saying here today in court that you did not tell your father's secretary, Marzie Eisenberg, that you were in the shower at the time that your parents were killed?
No.
Now, when the police got to the location later on, they noticed that the door to the guest house and all the lights were on inside the guest house.
Okay.
Why was the door open and why were the lights on?
I guess because I had just, the last time I had been in there, I had run in to get the gun and run out and wasn't concerned about the doors.
And it wasn't because you'd been inside of there taking a shower after you killed your parents, correct?
No, I did not take a shower anytime that night after my parents were killed.
And you have no recollection of any blood being on you, is that correct?
It's possible that at the gas station when he would change his pants and I was doing things that I don't even remember washing my hands in any way, but I suppose I might have. But I certainly was not taking a shower in the guest house.
So you went to the front of the house and you got into a car. Which car did you get into?
Eric's.
That was the Ford Escort?
Right.
And where did you go?
Well, I took a right, and I eventually just started driving down I believe the next street.
Now, when you say you took a right, you turned right from your driveway going north on Elm Drive towards Sunset. Is that correct?
That's right.
And did you actually make it up to Sunset or did you turn? There's another street that runs parallel to Sunset before you get to Sunset, right?
Right.
Did you turn on that street or did you go all the way to Sunset?
I turned on that street, I believe, but I can't remember if we went to the theater first or went to drop the guns off first for some reason. I think we went to the theater first, but I don't remember. I know I definitely made a turn. I'm pretty sure I made a turn so I could get out of the immediate area.
And which way did you turn?
I don't remember.
Well, I believe you indicated you took Coldwater up to Mulholland. Is that correct?
Yes.
And that would have required you to turn, when you went north on Elm to go towards Coldwater, you would have turned right or left.
One of my favorite supplements is Cunol turmeric. Turmeric helps with healthy joints and inflammation support, and Cunol has the #1 doctor recommended form of turmeric. Cunol, the brand I trust.
Well, I don't remember which way I went. I guess you could either go right or left. And you could go left. I guess you would go right then, if you wanted to go to Coldwater.
Well, did you turn right or left? Did you go right towards Coldwater or left towards Century City?
I don't remember.
Okay, so is it your best recollection here today that you went to the movie theater first
Yes, I think I went to the movie theater first. I'm pretty sure of that.
and you were driving, correct?
Yes.
And when you went to the movie theater, did you park in some sort of parking space or did you just pull up front? How did that occur?
No, we pulled to the side of the complex and parked at the meters.
Did you both get out of the car?
Yes.
Did someone pay the meter?
No.
Okay, and you went from the car up to the box office, correct?
Right.
Did you have to wait in line?
One or two people. Yes.
Okay. And about what time was it when you got to the movie theater?
I don't know. It was at the very end of that movie, I believe.
Which movie?
The one that we were supposed to see and we had asked the lady if we could get tickets for.
But were you supposed to see License to Kill or Batman?
Batman.
All right, so you went to get tickets for Batman, is that correct?
No, we asked her for tickets to License to Kill for the showing that was at the same time that Batman was. And she said that it was sold out. So then I asked for the tickets to Batman, and she said the movie was already too far. It was like at the end of the movie, and she said she couldn't sell tickets after like 20 minutes. So we weren't going to be able to get tickets for that. Then I said, well, just give me tickets to Batman anyway for the next showing. So I got the tickets to the next showing, but they had the times. So I just gave them to my brother and he threw them away.
What time did you kill your parents?
I don't know.
So you wanted to go see Batman, but you asked for tickets to License to Kill because at that time you already knew that the police might find Kerry Parker and he could tell them that you hadn't shown up. Is that why you asked for tickets to License to Kill?
I believe that's why, yes.
Okay, when did you think that all out?
On the way there?
Okay, so first you decided to pick up the shells because of the fingerprints. Then you decided to ask for tickets to License to Kill so that you could keep the police away from Kerry Parker, correct?
Well, that wasn't my main concern. My main concern was that, we would go and we would have tickets to give to the police. So when we said we were at the movie, we would show them tickets, and hopefully that would be, they wouldn't ask anymore and Kerry would not come into the picture. But in the event that they did find Kerry, I was thinking that I should not get the tickets to Batman and get the tickets to License to Kill so that I could at least tell Kerry that I had been to License to Kill, and I was hoping to tell the police that I'd been to License to Kill and show them the tickets. But when it was sold out, I couldn't get tickets. I asked for tickets to Batman for the 8 o'clock showing, hoping she would just give me those. And then she told me she couldn't give me those.
Had you already seen License to Kill?
Yes.
So you'd seen both those movies before you killed your parents.
Right.
And when you saw, how long before August the 20th had you seen License to Kill?
I believe the weekend before.
And how long before had you seen Batman?
Longer before that, I believe.
More than a week before.
Yeah, I think so.
Now, you didn't go to the theater to ask for tickets to License to Kill just so the police would know that you'd been there, right? You did it for another reason.
No, I did it so the police would know that I'd been there and I could give them tickets.
And also because you needed the police to know that you'd actually been there and not looked it up in the newspaper, right? Because
exactly. Yes.
you couldn't know from looking at the newspaper that License to Kill was going to be sold out that night.
Right.
Because it doesn't say movie at 8 will be sold out tonight in the newspaper.
Right, exactly.
So you had to go to the theater in order to establish that you had actually been there and found out that License to Kill was sold out.
Right.
And that would confirm to the police that you'd been to the theater and hadn't just cooked this up by reading the paper, right?
Well, not exactly. I mean, that's basically right. I mean, I figured that they would ask for tickets. So we tried to go over there and get tickets. And when that didn't work out, the next best thing, the only thing we could tell them is that License to Kill had been sold out, and hoping that would confirm that we had been there. But I wanted to have the tickets because the tickets would be able to show that we had been at the movie when my parents died. So I was trying to quickly create this alibi that I was at the movies. But since I couldn't get tickets, the next best thing I could do was at least show that we had been to theater at some point by saying that License to Kill was sold out, which was not a great idea because I knew then I'd have a problem with Kerry if they found Kerry. But at that point, we were just sort of scrambling. That was the best I could do.
How long did it take for you to park the car, go to the box office, have this transaction, and get back in the car?
Well, we ran to the box office and ran back. So maybe under 10 minutes, if that.
Then where did you go?
Well, my brother thinks we went then to go drop off the guns.
Okay, so you went from Century City back up north towards Mulholland, is that correct?
Right.
And you were driving, is that correct?
Yes.
And when you parked the car to go into the theater, did you park it just right there on the street?
At the meters on the, if you're facing it the right side.
Okay. So you didn't have to walk very far to go from where you park your car to where the box office was. Is that correct?
Well, we ran and we didn't have to run very far because we ran like up the middle. It was like a middle walkway that led around to the middle of the complex.
So you spent no more than 10 minutes going from the car to the box office and back to the car, and then you left and went up towards Mulholland, correct?
Right.
And you were still driving.
Yes.
Okay, what route did you take to go from Century City up towards Mulholland?
Well, I'm really not sure because I'm not sure which one I went first, and I don't have. If I knew the streets I was taking, I'd be able to figure out better where I had gone first. That's one of the reasons I can't figure it out. But I'm sure I went back on Santa Monica, and I just cut through the flats of Beverly Hills, and went through the lights, and probably went up Rexford to Coldwater.
Okay, so you do have a specific recollection of going up Rexford to Coldwater, is that correct?
Well, that's the only street that I can think of by name right now because my dad almost bought a house that was on the corner of Rexford and Sunset. But I could have taken Rodale Drive, I think goes all the way through, or whatever the road is in front of the Beverly Hills Hotel. All those streets lead up to eventually Coldwater. So I took one of them.
And you went towards Coldwater, and you took Coldwater all the way up to Mulholland, correct?
Right.
When you got to Mulholland, which way did you turn, right or left?
Left.
And how far did you travel on Mulholland Drive before you stopped?
Not very far. Just till I got to a point where I felt I could pull over. There was enough room and I could pull over. And there looked like there was a drop off where we could drop the guns off there.
When you stopped and your brother dropped off the guns, did he drop off the guns on the side that you had been traveling on, or did he go across Mulholland and drop them off on the other side?
He dropped him off on the same side that I pulled over. And then I turned around. And when I came back, he was standing there.
And he got back in the car with you?
Right.
How long was he out of the car?
Maybe 2 minutes.
How long did it take you to get up there? Once you left the flats at Beverly Hills and went up to this area, how long did it take you?
That would take about probably 10 minutes, maybe just under, I guess.
When your brother got back in the car, did he say anything to you about what he had done?
He may have. I don't remember. I'm sure he probably did say where he put them, but
Before you dropped him off with the guns, did you have any discussion with him as to how he should hide the guns?
no.
Okay, did you say just hide them, or what? There was no conversation, or how did that happen?
Well, there was no specific conversation or any advice I gave him that I can remember. I mean, I guess I may have told him, try to hide them well or something. I don't know. I really can't remember that.
What did you do with the shotgun shells?
Well, those I remember we still had at the gas station because I remember putting them in a dumpster with the clothes. So we hadn't, pretty sure he didn't take any of them down the ravine, but he may have taken some. I don't know.
And why was it that you decided to hide the guns?
So the police wouldn't find them.
So you could get away with it, right?
So they wouldn't know that we were involved at that point, yes.
Okay. Now then, after you left Mulholland, where did you go?
Well, we either went to the theater, but if we already went to the theater, then we went to the Taste of LA where Perry was supposed to be.
And were you driving at that time?
Yes.
And when you got to the Taste of LA, did you find a parking space right away, or did you have to look for one? And how did that occur?
I remember that we were driving around a little bit lost, trying to find our way. I couldn't find the entrance. I was lost in some way. I can't remember the streets I took, but I remember being confused and eventually finding it. And then there was like a parking area where all the cars were and a gate and a a guard or whatever at the gate who was basically telling me that it was closing up, and they were closing and they weren't letting people in anymore. And I just said that I had a friend in there and I wanted to find him. And at that point, my brother was waiting in the car.
How long were you lost before you found the entrance?
It was not really lost as much as just sort of confused as to the entrance. I don't, maybe a few minutes.
Now, you said you went to a gas station. When was it during your journeys that you went to the gas station?
On the way to the Taste of LA,
Where was the gas station?
somewhere along the way. I'm not really sure exactly.
Well, could you describe this gas station for me, please?
Very vague recollection, but I remember the big dumpsters against the wall and some building and then the pumps. And you just sort of drive in. And I remember parking the car in front of the dumpsters and had the doors open. And we were searching the car and he was changing his clothes. And there was a little building there where there was like, restrooms and so on. And that's all I remember.
Was the gas station open or closed?
It was open.
There were people there?
I believe so, yes.
When your brother was, did you change your clothes too?
I don't really remember. I think I changed my shoes or something. I didn't change my pants.
Why did you change your shoes?
I think there was blood on my shoes.
Whose shoes did you put on?
My brother's.
Do you wear the same size?
Yes.
So the gas station was open and you were changing your clothes. Were there people that you could see while you were doing this?
I don't remember. I do remember that it was lighted where the pumps were. And there was some light where I was, but it was not very good light. And I had trouble searching the car because it wasn't so lighted. But, we didn't talk to anybody or anything. We just left.
How long were you at the gas station doing these things?
We rushed through that. And I still think it probably took about under 5 minutes, but several minutes for sure.
How long did it take you to get from the gas station to the Taste of LA?
I don't remember, but that whole trip to get to the Taste of LA was probably like 15 to 20 minutes.
When you got to the Taste of LA, you talked to the man at the guard gate and he told you couldn't come in and you convinced him to let you in. Is that correct?
Yes.
Then you went and parked?
No, I was already parked. My brother was in the car and I walked up to go in and that's when he said it was closing. And
All right, so it wasn't a gate to the parking lot, it was a gate to the event, correct? And so your brother was waiting in the car.
yes.
Was he in a normal parking space or was he up against a curb?
No, we were, I believe, in a normal parking space. There were people still leaving. I just have a recollection of seeing him in the car as I left.
And during this
Close,
period, I'm sorry.
close to the gate.
Then you went inside, is that correct?
Yes.
Did you look for Perry?
Yes.
How long did you look for Perry?
Didn't take more than a couple minutes to realize there was basically nobody there. All the booths were closing down. Just circled around the booths. And then I asked, I guess at that point, I believe my brother came in also.
Did he
I
help
don't
you?
remember that so well, but I do remember asking to use a phone inside.
Did you use a phone inside?
Yes.
And is that the phone that you used to call Perry? And those numbers are reflected on the exhibit I showed you earlier.
Right.
Now you had a phone call with him at 11:07 that lasted for 6 minutes, correct?
Okay.
What did you say to Perry during that time?
That I had missed him and that he obviously he wasn't there. He said that he had waited for me and that he had to leave and he was going to sleep. He had to work the next day and I told him, no, I really need to talk to him. We haven't talked in a while, I believe. I hadn't met with him in a while and that I really need to talk to him and could we meet tonight? And it's about all I remember the conversation except for him agreeing that we could meet at the Cheesecake Factory in Beverly Hills, and he was willing to meet us there. And that's all I remember.
Then there was a second phone call. The first phone call was at 11:07 and lasted 6 minutes. That takes us to 11:13. There was a second phone call to Perry Berman from the same location at 11:15, and that was
Right.
from you.
Right.
Why did you call him back?
I think I know why, but I'd be guessing because I really don't remember the second call so well.
In the second call, you asked, didn't you ask him to go back to the house with you?
Yes, I believe so.
Why did you want Perry to go back to the house with you?
Because I was just concerned that we were not going to be able to make it through an evening with him after all this had happened. And I just wasn't sure. I thought to myself, why did I? I'm pretty sure that this is what I was thinking, but I really don't have a great recollection. It like comes and goes. But I essentially believe that I was sort of just saying to myself, why didn't I just meet him at the house? And so I believe that's why I called him back.
Because you wanted him to meet you at the house and not at the Cheesecake Factory.
Right, and then I wouldn't have to go through the evening with him and be concerned about getting through the evening.
It wasn't that you wanted him to be with you when you discovered your parents. That wasn't the reason you wanted him to meet you at the house?
Yeah, that's the reason.
You wanted him to witness you discovering them and to see your surprise, right?
No, I wanted him to be with me because I didn't want to find them alone, and I really didn't want to have to call 911 myself.
Because you knew that you would have to act like you had just found your parents when in fact that wasn't true, right?
No, it was mostly just my feeling that I would like to have him with me.
You wanted your good friend Perry to come into the house with you and see what you had done in that room?
I just remember what I was thinking, which was that I felt very, I thought it would be comforting. My brother wasn't comforting. I was feeling that the whole thing was feeling very crazed with the dropping off of the guns and the whole thing with the movie theater. And I just felt like while I was there and I had missed him, I could have just gone back. But I wanted to make an attempt to have Perry come with me.
And in order to lure Perry back to the house, you told him that you needed to go there to get a false ID for your brother, correct?
I believe I told him that, yes.
Okay, and what false ID was it that your brother was going to go get, Mr. Menendez?
I didn't have anything in particular. I was thinking it was just an excuse.
Was it Donovan's false identification?
That was the false ID that he had.
Did he have another false identification from your cousin, Timmy Anderson, to your knowledge?
No.
Your Honor, I have on the board an exhibit which has not yet been marked. I think it's 248 is the next in order. 249, I'm sorry. May that be so marked?
249.
Thank you. May I approach, please?
Yes.
Mr. Menendez, I'm showing you an exhibit which is 249, which is a compilation of Thomas Guide cases. Do you recognize that in this, can you see this? It says Westwood here, it says Beverly Hills, and it's got several times it says Los Angeles. Do you see this map? Okay. At the time that you killed your parents, they were living at North Elm in Beverly Hills, which was the 700 block, correct?
Right.
And you see up here, it says Elm 700. Can you see that? For the record, Your Honor, I'm going to mark that with a red dot. In addition, on this map, at Santa Monica Boulevard and Century Park. Now, the Century 14 theaters that you're talking about, were they on Century Park? Near the Schubert Theater here? Is it the same complex with the Schubert Theater?
I believe so. It's the Century City mall there.
Okay,
It's the same mall that,
Was it in the shopping mall?
Yeah.
All right, Your Honor, I'm going to mark the shopping mall here with a red dot as well. Now, also on this map, Santa Monica Civic is right down here. It's on Main Street at Pico. It says Civic Auditorium. Is that where the Taste of LA was? The Civic Auditorium.
I believe so.
I'm gonna mark that with the red dot as well, Your Honor. And in this map, at the very top, you can see Coldwater Canyon, and it goes off the top of the map, 249, and then you can see Mulholland Drive here. It appears that off the map they intersect. Is this about the area where you turn left onto Mulholland?
Yes,
And I'm gonna mark that top with a dot as well. Now then, Mr. Menendez, it's your testimony that you went from the home at Elm Drive and you either went to Century Theater or you went up and got rid of the guns first.
Right, I think we went to the theater.
Okay, so you went to the theater, you went from Elm Drive, you went down, did you take Santa Monica Boulevard
Um,
to the mall, to the Century City Mall?
Right, we came somewhere across, I don't think. Yeah.
And then down and you went
Right.
there.
Yeah.
Then you went back towards the Elm Drive house, is that correct, to get up towards Coldwater?
I believe so, yes.
Okay, and then you went up Coldwater and you went all the way up to Mulholland, turned left, stopped for a couple of minutes, correct?
Right,
Then went back down Coldwater. Is that
Yes.
correct?
that's right.
When you went back down Coldwater, did you go back towards your family's home or did you take another route to deviate off to the west?
I don't remember. My brother was giving me the directions because I really didn't know the way too well.
Did you take main streets? Did you take streets that had 2 lanes in each direction or were you taking streets that had 1 lane in each direction?
I believe it was main streets.
All right, and then you went back down towards this area and you went to a gas station. Now, was that gas station on a major street,
I think so.
like Santa Monica Boulevard
I
perhaps?
believe so.
Or Wilshire or Pico?
It's on one of the main streets.
Okay, and that was one of the streets that led out towards Santa Monica, correct?
Right.
Okay, and you went to the gas station and you stopped there for no more than 5 minutes, correct?
Right.
And then from the gas station, you went down to the Civic Auditorium, parked the car, went inside, looked for Perry Berman, is that correct?
Right.
When you saw that he wasn't there, you made your first phone call to him at 11:07, correct?
Right.
Now, did you hear the testimony of Mrs. Averill Crone? She heard the noises around 10:10 p.m.
I've heard her testimony, but I don't really remember what she said.
Right.
I guess she said that.
And then your attorneys called witnesses that indicated that the shots were at 10 p.m. Do you remember the testimony of Mrs. Lord,
Yes.
the woman with the hearing aids?
Right.
Okay. How did you, if the murders occurred at 10, if the killings,
I'm going to object to the use of the word murders.
All right, she had corrected herself.
if the killings occurred at 10 and the phone call to Perry Berman was at 11:07,
Right.
how did you do all of that in 67 minutes?
Well, I haven't added it up, but it would be under 67 minutes.
And you're absolutely sure that those distances were covered in 67 minutes, is that correct?
Yes.
Were you speeding in the car?
Not particularly. I did not want to get a ticket, obviously, but I was driving fast and, I was having some problems driving, so I don't remember how fast I was going. But I wasn't, racing
How was the
way
traffic?
over the speed limit.
How was the traffic that night?
There was no traffic.
And it's your testimony that you accomplished all of these tasks in 67 minutes.
Yes.
Your Honor, I'm going to go on to another topic, so can we break? I'm not going to finish today.
Let me see you at the sidebar as far as scheduling.
Yes.
Decision that we want you back here tomorrow at 9 o'clock. So we'll be in recess at this time, and just a couple reminders here. I've said this quite often, but it's very important that you continue to follow the instruction not to permit yourself to be exposed to anything about this case outside the courtroom in any form whatsoever. You must make your decision based only on what you see and hear in this courtroom while you're in the courtroom and on my instructions on the law. Also, you've heard reference throughout the trial to various locations and things of that nature. It's very important that you not go out there and drive around and go to the locations or try to test times and things of that nature. Those Those things are not for the jurors to do. Although occasionally we've had jurors do their own experiments outside the courtroom, that's entirely forbidden. That you must not do that. You must make your decision based on the evidence that's brought to you here in the courtroom, and so you can't do any investigating on your own. All right, we'll see you all back here tomorrow at 9 o'clock.